Chapter 92. The highest standard collection room was not only protected by a magic circle, but also required the approval of a high priest to borrow materials. Even the cleaning work could not be done by slaves. The warriors on duty were also divided into ranks. Amon was appointed by the adoratress, so of course he had the highest rank and was qualified to guard all the archives. Maria once said that she would give Amon a chance to read the records of Duk after he became a supreme warrior. As soon as Amon entered the temple of Isis, he actually had the opportunity to read any ancient book here. No one knew that this foreign warrior actually knew the hieroglyph of Igut. But Amon could not read it openly. A warrior on duty holding a scroll and reading it would definitely arouse suspicion. Some of the most precious books were locked in special boxes and could only be opened with the company of a senior priest. He could only take advantage of the time when he was patrolling alone to tidy up the bookshelves and read. The higher the standard of the archives, the more leisurely it was. Few people came to borrow books, so Amon always found this opportunity. There were two kinds of books that interested Amon the most. One was the legends about the gods from a long time ago. Now that the empire of Igut had a unified divine decree, the different myths of the ancient times could only be found here. The other kind was the practice notes left by the mages and warriors of various periods, which were the precious wealth of countless people. After quietly reading some of the books he was interested in, Amon realized how precious the information left by Crazy Ol was. Bear must have come here and read all the valuable records. Crazy Ol must have received Bear's message. The records he left for Amon were condensed essences. Nietzsche had been to many places in his 100 years of life. Not only did he read the books of the Temple of Isis, but he also left them to Amon. But Amon still gained a lot here, because Crazy Ol only left him records related to the practice of magic. Many other materials also contained important information, which Crazy Ol could not tell Amon everything. What Amon was most interested in was the legend of Duk, but he could not find it in a short time. The archives of the Temple of Isis were so large that it would take more than a month to go through all of them even if he guarded one room a day. Amon could only read them secretly when no one was around. It was impossible for him to read all the books in a short time. This was the most leisurely time Amon had ever spent in his life. Sometimes he patrolled the archives with other warriors, and sometimes he stayed in a fixed place to help the priests who consulted the books. The warriors had their own quarters in the shrine. Amon had a separate hut. Although it was not big, it was comfortable enough to live in. The monthly salary was 5 gold coins, which was enough for an ordinary noble family to live in. The shrine of Isis was indeed luxurious. If Amon wanted to marry and start a family, he could also buy a house in Montefiore and have children. He could work in the Temple of Isis during the day and go home at night. But he still had to live in the hut when it was his turn to be on duty at night. Honorable warriors like him were not nobles, but they seemed to have some kind of halo because of the temple. Coupled with the good salary and leisure life, many families in the city of Isis were willing to marry their daughters to him. Amon was already a 5th-level warrior at such a young age, and he had an income of 5 gold coins a month. He was also a handsome young man, so of course he was very popular. Sometimes when he left the temple to buy food or eat in the city, there were always restaurant owners, shopkeepers and the like who tried to get close to him, asking about his well-being and introducing girls to him. In this situation, Amon always refused with a smile. He really did not want to. Although everything seemed to be safe for the time being, Amon knew his identity and his burden. He was a sorcerer and he wanted to solve the secrets of the gods. He had promised a goddess that he would find the survivors of Duk and help them rebuild their home. The road ahead was dangerous and difficult. Amon seldom went out. He spent most of his time in the archives of the Temple of Isis. He was probably the most dedicated warrior on duty. He had visited the prosperous city of Montefiore several times. His guide was Aesop, the slave of the merchant Sio. Amon kept his promise and paid a visit to Sio. When he learned that his benefactor had become an honorable warrior of the Temple of Isis, Sio was very surprised and enthusiastic. Sehather even wanted to marry his daughter to Amon. He bragged to everyone he met that he had seen the future of this foreign warrior and that he was indeed a great man. But Amon preferred to take Aesop out with him. When they visited the streets and alleys, he listened to the driver tell all kinds of anecdotes, which were more interesting than the ancient books in the archives. Of course, Amon's main focus was still on the practice of two sides. He never stopped meditating every night. It was not convenient to practice alchemy openly in the temple of Isis, but it did not hinder the practice of strength. As for the practice of body arts, he was a warrior, so there was no doubt about it. Amon's injuries healed quickly, but his strength recovered very slowly. He felt that his body was going through a process of growth again. Although the recovery was slow, it was growing every day. When Amon felt that he had completely recovered, the growth did not stop. Amon was a little surprised to find that the growth was not only the power in his blood, but also the magic power in using magic. Was this the magic of the power of two sides? He could even see the changes in his body. From his bones to his muscles, he seemed to have gone through a baptism. His physical strength and endurance were already far beyond that of ordinary fifth-level warriors. This time, he seemed to have broken through some kind of limit. When the growth of his strength and the changes in his body finally reached a stable state, Amon clearly felt the changes in himself. Although he could recover his energy and magic power through magic meditation in the past, he still needed to sleep and rest after all. But now, as long as he meditated for a period of time every night, he could completely recover, even if he did not sleep for many days. If necessary, he could even go for a long time without eating, but he needed to use special magic meditation to replenish the power he had consumed. Then he did a test in private. He did not eat for half a month. Although he felt light and healthy, he could not go without food forever. There was still a limit to what he could bear. Was this the process of breaking through the limit from a fifth-level warrior to a sixth-level warrior? No wonder that warrior Heaven still had such amazing power in the final battle after chasing him for so long. If Amon did not use the scroll in advance and used magic with the help of the staff at the last moment, he would have definitely fallen before Heaven. One night, Amon was in a very quiet state of meditation. Finally, he felt that the slow growth of his strength in the past 6 months had stabilized. He had completely recovered. After recovering, Amon almost had a brand new body, and his strength was also much stronger than before. It was as if he had experienced a more perfect rebirth. Had he passed the physical test and become a sixth-level warrior? Did this mean that he had also improved his magic? If Lucien wanted to verify it, he only needed to take out the Taraculus left by Crazy Ole and read the next piece of information. However, Amon did not dare to do this in the Temple of Isis. He tried his best to set up a magic circle in his own house, but there were too many powerful people here. Maybe even the gods were watching. One day, when it was not his turn to be on duty, Amon left the temple in the evening. Many warriors liked to drink and have fun at this time. Those who had families would go home, and those who did not would not come back until the next morning. It was rare for Amon to go out and relax. Montefiore was a large city. When he arrived at the north of the city, he first found a tavern to have a meal, and then he watched a performance. It was a long way back after dark, so he simply found a big inn to stay in. He asked for the best room with a small courtyard. Amon's income was very high, and he was very rich, but he had almost no place to spend money. It was not a big deal for him to go out for a while. In the middle of the night, he used a parangan to set up a magic circle in his bedroom to conceal his presence. Then he took out the staff and the Taraculus, which he had not used for a long time. Crazy Ole's voice sounded in his ears again. "My child, I must congratulate you again. Reading this message, you have already achieved the 6th level of magic. Now I'm going to tell you something that you may not have recovered from. Becoming a 6th level mage means that you can practice advanced magic, but there is a requirement, which is that you must never stop meditating for a long period of time. Many 5th level mages could not advance because they did not do this. Once they stopped practicing magic for a certain period of time, they would have to start all over again. Don't go to the ancient records. There are no such clear records. This was the conclusion Bear came to after studying the records of all the supreme mages in the archives of the Isis shrine. Bear told me about it. Everyone's situation is different. It is hard to tell what kind of accumulation is needed to break through to the 6th level. Some may be fast, some may be slow. But the accumulation process cannot be interrupted, or else you will have to start all over again. A mage should consciously concentrate on his practice and not be disturbed by anything that happens to him. It is part of the process of breaking through. At this point, you can no longer deliberately practice magic for the sake of it. It is part of your life. Because of perseverance, pressure, or just luck, people can achieve it. But the best state is to get used to it. That is the only way to maintain the most peaceful state of mind during the meditation. Chapter 93. At the end of this message was the practice of various supreme magic, slightly different from the previous ones. This time, Crazy Old did not introduce all the techniques of practicing and using supreme magic in detail. First, he gave a comprehensive introduction so that Aman could understand the practice of various kinds of magic. Then he focused on the fields that Crazy Old was best at, such as spatial magic, message magic, elemental magic, and so on. The practice of supreme magic consumed a great deal of time and energy. Even a supreme mage could not take care of everything at the same time. Nietzsche was an 8th-level mage. His achievements in magic had not reached the pinnacle, but he was definitely one of the top great theologians. He had studied almost all kinds of magic and practice related to it. With Aman's current convenience, he could already read all kinds of supreme magic books on his own, which was probably beyond Crazy Old's expectation. But Crazy Old's message in the Taraculus was still very valuable. He explained everything in detail in the most concise way. Not to mention what he was good at, he even used the best parts of other supreme mages' experiences to teach Aman the magic he hadn't practiced to a very high level. If Aman was left to explore, study, and verify on his own, who knew how many years and efforts it would take? Crazy Old did this because he wanted to unravel the secrets of the gods. Although he did not fulfill his wish in the end, Aman benefited a lot from this legacy. Reading this message, Aman immediately had a plan to practice supreme magic. He would use Crazy Old's teaching as the core and the various books in the Temple of Isis as supplements. However, Crazy Old was not good at body arts, and the method of practicing the power of two sides left by Bear had already been verified. If he continued to explore, everything would depend on Aman himself. Although they were both in the Temple of Isis, Aman rarely saw Maria, except on public occasions such as sacrificial ceremonies. At that time, the adoratress would be in the center of the worship of tens of thousands of people, and Aman could only stand and watch from afar. Normally, Aman did not have the opportunity to see Maria alone. The Temple of Isis was as large as a small city. It was almost impossible for the high and mighty adoratress to have direct contact with a warrior on duty in the archives. The adoratress would never come to the archives to borrow materials. If she wanted to read any book, there would be someone to bring it to her. In theory, Gabriel did not have to come to the archives in person. But she had been there several times, and every time she came, it was Aman who was on duty in the archives. She claimed that she was here to retrieve the secret books for the adoratress. Because the books were very important, she came in person. Aman had a feeling that Maria wanted Gabriel to come and see how he was doing. Maybe it was just his wishful thinking, because the books that Gabriel came to retrieve were the most precious. Even Aman was not qualified to see them. Usually, they were locked in boxes protected by magic. The key was in the hands of the full-time priest in charge of the archives, and it could only be opened with the witness of the warrior on duty. Gabriel's status was higher than the full-time priest in charge of the archives, so sometimes he would bring the key directly and open the box with Aman as witness. The last time the supreme warrior came to return the books, he had a brief chat with Aman and asked him how his injury was recovering. At that time, Aman was in a state of slow growth and answered Gabriel's question truthfully. Gabriel was a little surprised and only said that he would find an opportunity to talk to Aman about the practice of body arts. Of course, it was more than he wanted to wait for the guidance of such a supreme warrior. Aman thanked him repeatedly and then asked what the adoratress wanted to see. Gabriel replied that this book was very important for him to break through the 7th level and become a supreme mage. The test to become a 7th-level mage was the fusion of faith. Aman had just passed the test of body arts, the breakthrough of the limit, and the power of two sides had been cultivated to the 6th level. According to the context of Bayer's last words, the next test he faced was likely to be the fusion of faith of magic. As for whether this was the case or not, he still needed to verify it himself. A book that was very important for the advancement of the adoratress of the Temple of Isis to become a supreme mage, of course, made Amon very curious. Coincidentally, this time Gabriel came and went in a hurry. After returning the book, he gave the key to the box to Amon and asked him to return the key to the full-time priest, so Amon had the opportunity to read this precious book. This book was written by the adoratress of the Temple of Isis 200 years ago. To Amon's slight surprise, this book did not describe anything about the practice of magic, nor did it mention a word about the test of magic advancement. The whole book was a hymn. Not only the words were gorgeous, but also the sincere and true description. Even Amon was deeply shocked when he read it. Even if one did not believe in the existence of the goddess Isis, one had to admire the spirit of the adoratress's faith. It was real and powerful. This was how Amon felt. However, what kind of mystery did this hymn describe about the integration of faith, and what kind of help and inspiration Maria would get from it? Amon was still pondering. Gabriel said that he would talk to Amon about the practice of body arts when he had the chance, but more than a month had passed. Even when Amon was sure that he had achieved the 6th level of the power of two sides, he did not see Gabriel again. Just a few days after Amon read Crazy Ol's message, the annual blessing of the goddess began. This was one of the most important festivals in Montefiore. During this ceremony, Amon finally understood what Gabriel had been busy with. Of course, the goddess Isis would not show up in person. The person who represented the goddess blessing was the adoratress. This festival had not been held in Montefiore for a full 33 years, for no other reason than the absence of the adoratress. 2 years before Maria came to the Temple of Isis, the ceremony was not held. It was said that the adoratress was growing up under the goddess' care. The climax of the ceremony was after the sacrifice, when the adoratress would bless the people in the square in front of the temple. The square in front of the shrine of Isis was very large, and it could hold hundreds of thousands of people if they squeezed together. Almost all the residents of Memphis had come, and there were even farmers and shepherds from outside the city, as well as citizens from other cities who had heard the news. It was very difficult to maintain the order of so many people without any accidents of crowding and trampling. Even Amon was transferred to the square to be on duty. He stood among the crowd with a spear in his hand. When the blessing ceremony began, Maria, wearing a golden crown and holding a scepter, stepped onto the high platform in front of the temple. The priests stood around her and set up a magic formation. When the bell rang, the people in the square knelt toward the high platform. They saw Maria's expression was solemn. She silently chanted something and slowly raised the adoratress' scepter. The god's tear emitted a golden light. The light was very faint at first, but the area it illuminated was very wide. The magic formation set up by the priests gathered in the air and turned into a golden beam of light that shot into the sky. The beam of light became brighter and brighter, and gradually the whole sky was plated with gold. The golden sky was a rare spectacle in the world, and the people kneeling in the square were in deep awe. When the sky was golden, the beam of light disappeared. It looked like the adoratress' scepter was raised high and plated the sky with a layer of golden brilliance. The bell of the temple rang melodiously and slowly, echoing in the square. As the bell rang, a milky white light slowly floated down from the golden brilliance of the sky, like a veil or a milk waterfall, or like the hazy moonlight. This was the blessing of Isis. Maria had used it to treat Amon's injury, and now she cast it on hundreds of thousands of people. This was a high-level effect of magic. It could not only heal injuries, but also eliminate pain, wash away fatigue, restore physical strength, and give people confidence, strength, and courage. Such a blessing ceremony was an important reason why the people of Igut worship the goddess Isis. At the same time, it was also the symbol of the Temple of Isis. Although there were nearly 100 priests holding their scepters and set up a magic formation to cast this magic on hundreds of thousands of people and let everyone present feel its effect at the same time, Maria on the high platform had to be at least a supreme mage. She had finally succeeded in advancing and restored the most important ceremony of the Temple of Isis. From this moment on, she was the true adoratress of the Temple of Isis, and her position was unshakable. Amon also knelt in the crowd. No one knew better than him how soft and warm the blessing of Isis was. He had a familiar feeling, and when he knelt, he felt a sense of peace and tranquility from the bottom of his heart. The effect of this large-scale casting of magic was obviously not as good as when Maria healed Amon alone when she was still a 6th-level mage, but everyone in the square felt it. Everyone knelt on the ground devoutly and attentively. Hundreds of thousands of people were silent, and few people noticed what was happening around them. At this moment, Amon suddenly became alert. Unexpectedly, he bounced up from the ground and threw the spear in his hand to the left. In terms of pure strength, at this time, Amon was almost comparable to a supreme warrior. The spear flew out with a sharp and subtle tremor, and there was a circle of silver light in the air, like a ripple caused by a fish in the water. The spear met a black crossbow bolt in the air, which was 5 feet long and as thick as a wine cup. It suddenly shot from the crowd towards the adoratress on the high platform. The seemingly dim crossbow bolt collided with the spear in the air, making a roar like waves hitting the reef. The spear, which could even pierce a brick wall, was lightly bounced off. What was even more incredible was that the crossbow bolt did not change direction. It only paused in the air, and then, as if it suddenly gained new strength, continued to fly towards Maria. The people knelt on the ground and did not see this scene at all. The sound of the crossbow bolt colliding with the spear in the air happened to ring at the same time as the bell in the temple. People would never dream that there would be an assassin in such a sacred and solemn ceremony. Chapter 94. Almost all the warriors and mages in the city of Montefiore were in the square. The security was tight, but the warriors' main duty was to maintain order. They never dreamed that there would be an assassin. There were too many people in the square, and it was impossible to prevent people with bad intentions from sneaking in. But on such an occasion, trying to make trouble was no different from courting death, and yet someone did it. The assassin's timing was very clever. It was when the milky white light from the golden sky shone, and everyone was kneeling on the ground. Looking at the size of the arrow, only the strongest crossbow could shoot it, but the assassin used a bow. The bowstring was originally wrapped around his waist, and the spine of the bow and the arrow were hidden in a cane. The assassin disguised himself as a hobbling old man. Taking advantage of the people kneeling and praying, he suddenly drew the bow and shot the arrow. His movements were as fast as lightning. Not to mention the power and accuracy of the arrow, even the sudden movement of the arrow could only be done by a supreme warrior. It was too difficult for the arrow to hit Maria. How could the adoratress not have protection when she cast magic? The magic formation was a barrier. The assassin wanted to take advantage of the people's relaxation. The arrow was very strange. When it bounced off Amon's spear, it paused in the air for a moment, and then its speed became even faster. This pause was enough for the guards to react. There were 12 supreme warriors under the high platform where the adoratress was casting the spell, and 6 of them were facing this direction. Several sword rays rose into the sky and almost simultaneously cut the arrow flying in the air. Even if the arrow was made of the strongest material in the world, it would still be smashed to pieces. But something unexpected happened again. There was a violent wave of power in the air, but there was no sound. Amon could only sense it using magic detection. Every time the sword ray hit the arrow trembled as if it had turned into a shadow. The violent vibration made it almost impossible to see it clearly. It paused in the air several times, but did not change direction and continued to fly forward. Instead, it shot into the air covered by the magic formation. Amon sucked in a breath of cold air. To be able to shoot such a powerful arrow, it was definitely a rare supreme warrior. But the scene of his javelin and the sword rays of several supreme warriors intercepting the arrow reminded Amon of a very clever magic, energy magic. There was no such thing as low or middle-level energy magic. The starting point was high-level energy magic. Until now, Amon was barely able to start practicing it. This kind of magic was very esoteric and even difficult to understand. All kinds of magic were about communicating with the energy of the outside world and transforming it into the power of the laws of nature. Energy magic was pure use of energy. Although Aman had not practiced it yet, he had a feeling that the energy magic contained in this arrow could only be achieved by a supreme mage. The impact, conversion, and consumption of energy could not change the direction of the arrow. Before the arrow's power was completely consumed, it would continue to fly towards its target. How could this be? No one could be both a supreme warrior and a supreme mage. This was the extreme of the power of two sides that Aman pursued. Was the assassin a god? There was another possibility. The arrow itself was an extremely precious magic artifact, and it was shot by a supreme warrior and a supreme mage at the same time. The warrior shot the arrow with all his strength, and the mage cast energy magic on the arrow. There was no time for Aman to think carefully. He wanted to continue to stop the arrow, but it was too late. He turned and immediately rushed in the direction of the arrow, taking away the javelin of another warrior as he ran. It was the warrior closest to Aman. He was kneeling devoutly on the ground, not knowing what had happened. He didn't even know that Aman had taken away his javelin. The arrow was shot towards the platform. Suddenly, a golden light shield appeared in the void. The arrow was frozen in the air for about a breath's time, then it passed through the shield and shot towards Maria. This distance was very close, only a dozen steps away. Maria was standing on the platform, casting an extremely difficult magic. She couldn't move until she stopped. But at this moment, a man had jumped onto the platform and stood in front of the adoratress. It was Gabriel. The blessing of the people did not stop. The echoes of the bell were still floating in the square. Maria's body was surrounded by various kinds of protection, including a transparent air elemental armor, an invisible energy shield, and a magical shield that flashed with colorful light. All the brilliant mages in Montefiore were under the platform at this moment. More than half of them were operating the magic circle, but the others were not just for show. They immediately took action to protect the adoratress. Everything happened too fast. It was not a test of people's ability, but their reflexes. Maria could have dodged, but that would mean that the ceremony would be interrupted. She chose to trust the people around her. The shields should have been able to block the arrow, but Gabriel could not let that happen. She did something that was out of line. Only the saintess could ascend the dais, and she jumped onto it. Gabriel swung the sword in her right hand. The silver sword trembled violently when it hit the black arrow. The parangons inlaid on the edge of the sword shattered, and the sword itself broke into several pieces. Then time seemed to stop. Gabriel's left hand held the arrow, and the tip of the arrow touched the armor on her chest. Her grip was very steady. The arrow trembled like a struggling viper, and blood seeped out of Gabriel's fingernails. The arrow was blocked. When the trembling gradually stopped, countless cracks appeared on the body of the arrow, and then it shattered into pieces and fell to the ground. Aman did not catch up with the assassin. After shooting the arrow, the assassin had already jumped high and flew to the edge of the square. When Aman turned around, he only saw the back of the assassin. Then there were people flying in the air and on the ground. They accurately stepped on the narrow space between the crowd and chased the assassin out of the square. On the platform, Maria's lips moved slightly. She ordered, Vord, lead the mages, Enk, lead the warriors to catch the assassin. Burke, continue to operate the magic circle. Do not interrupt the ceremony. The shadow of the dragon, command the order in the square. There must be no chaos. Vord was a 9th-level mage and the chief high priest of the Temple of Isis. The other two high priests were Julian and Burke. Enk was an 8th-level warrior and the chief guardian supreme warrior of the Temple of Isis. The shadow of the dragon was another supreme warrior. For the first time, Maria publicly gave orders to command these people at the same time. In an emergency, there was no room for hesitation. Vord led 2 supreme mages and Enk led 2 supreme warriors. A total of 6 people chased after the assassin. Looking at the speed of the assassin's escape, ordinary people could not catch up at all. This was a real assassin. Regardless of whether his attack hit or not, he would immediately escape thousands of miles away. If one's reaction was slightly slower, they would not even be able to touch his shadow. Aman couldn't help at all. He turned around and picked up the javelin. When he looked up again, he saw the assassin jump out of the square. The other assassin threw something in the air, which turned into a shuttle in the air. The shuttle wrapped around the two of them and flew away. Sure enough, the assassin was not alone. There was another person at the edge of the square to receive him, and he had already prepared a magic artifact to escape. The magic used by the receiver was so brilliant, it was obvious that he was a top supreme mage. The step that the assassin took made Aman feel like he saw a familiar shadow. He had only seen the legendary first warrior of the continent, Enkidu, with such amazing strength and speed, and his figure was too similar. If it was really Enkidu, then the person who received him must be Gilgamesh. These two people were not afraid of anything, even the gods. If it was really Enkidu and Gilgamesh, they had the ability to do so, but why would they come to Montefiore to assassinate the Adoratress? It did not make sense in any way, and these two heroes did not look like people who would be assassins. Aman did not see who the two people were, and he only had some doubts in his heart, but he could not be sure. This was a shocking event, but except for the guards around the high platform and Aman in the distance, the hundreds of thousands of people kneeling in the square did not even notice it. Everything happened within a few breaths of the echoing bell. The Adoratress ordered that the ceremony should not be interrupted and that the people should not be alarmed on the spot, and the trackers had already followed the assassin. With 3 supreme mages and 3 supreme warriors, coupled with the protection of the magic formation in Montefiore, it would be difficult for any assassin to escape. When the blessing ceremony was over, as usual, there was a grand carnival, and the people in the city shouted praises to the goddess Isis. This grand ceremony had been expected for 33 years. In the midst of the carnival, there was a hidden tension in the atmosphere of Montefiore. The protection function of the magic formation on the city wall was quietly activated, and the detection function was also activated to the extreme. The city guards did not participate in the carnival, and patrolling warriors could be seen in every corner. The city of Montefiore looked as if nothing had happened. The Adoratress completed all the rituals of the ceremony according to tradition, and at the same time, continued to order more people to track down the assassins. Warriors and priests on duty were not allowed to go home. Aman was transferred to guard the city wall that night, and the next day he returned to the temple of Isis to guard the archives. After the blessing ceremony, he received orders not to tell the outside world what he saw in the square, because the Adoratress did not want to cause panic among the people. The news that there were assassins at the blessing ceremony of Isis eventually spread inside the temple of Isis, and Aman also heard the private discussions of his colleagues. It was said that the chief high priest Vord and his men did not catch the assassins and let them escape. On the third night, Aman was suddenly informed that the chief high priest Vord had summoned him. He was taken to a majestic hall, which was not lit with candles or oil lamps, but was decorated with bright parangons, which were actually illuminated by magic. In the hall sat not only the chief high priest Vord, but also the lord of Montefiore, Jiatujin, and the supreme warrior Gabriel. To Aman's slight disappointment, Maria was not present. Both the chief high priest Vord and the lord Jiatujin praised Aman's actions in the square, but the one who asked questions was Gabriel. She said in an approving tone, "The square is too big. More than half of the mages are helping the Adoratress bless the people, and the rest of the mages and supreme warriors are also around the high platform. The assassin was at the edge of the square, and there is not a single mage within 100 steps of him. You are not the warrior closest to the assassin. There are a total of 12 people who are as close as you, and there are 4 warriors who are even closer to the assassin. I saw the javelin you threw. I didn't expect you to be a 6th level warrior, and your strength has reached the peak of the 6th level. Apart from you, the strongest warrior around the assassin is only a 4th level warrior. No wonder you were the only one who reacted. There are 2 main reasons for calling you here today. First, Lord Jiatujin wants to know what reward you would like to receive. The news that there was an assassin at the ceremony will spread sooner or later. The Adoratress has ordered that from tomorrow onwards, there is no need to hide it anymore. You can accept the praise of the people. Second, she wants to know if you saw the assassin's face clearly. Please try your best to remember it. Reward? Aman had neither money nor treasures, so the so-called reward was unnecessary. He replied respectfully, "My life was saved by the adoratress at the Nile River. Otherwise, I would have become food for the beasts in the wilderness. With my weak strength, I couldn't have stopped the assassin's arrow. I just tried my best, and it was all part of my duty. If I discovered the assassin but failed to stop him immediately, as a warrior on duty, I should be punished. I'm just doing my duty, and I don't ask for any reward." To be honest, I didn't see the assassin's face clearly. When I turned around, he had already flown out of the square. I only saw his back, and he was tall and burly. However, I have a feeling that this person's movement technique is very light, as if he has deliberately changed his body shape. As for the other person, I didn't see him clearly at all. It was just a black shadow that disappeared in a flash. He carefully recalled everything he had seen that day in the square. After listening to him, the lords looked at each other. Vord nodded and said, "I only returned this afternoon after tracking the assassin and didn't catch him. I didn't expect you to see him clearly, but I still have to ask what I have to ask. Sorry for making things difficult for a warrior like you. What you just said is very important. Can you tell me the reason? Why did you feel that way?" Aman shook his head and said, "I can't describe it. I've been thinking about the scene for the past few days, and I feel that the assassin's body shape doesn't match his posture. It's just a feeling, and there's no clear reason for it." Jitujin said, "Brave warrior, you probably don't know how terrifying the person you faced was, but you still charged forward. Your fearless spirit is worthy of praise. Although you don't ask for any reward as the governor, I must reward you. This is an order that cannot be refused. Do you have anything else to say?" Aman raised his head and said, "Since that's the case, I thank the governor. Actually, I just want to ask if the saintess is well?" Gabriel said, "Of course the saintess is safe and sound, but there are many things that she has to deal with these few days. Aman, you can leave for now. The saintess will summon you when she has time." The governor of Montefiore rewarded him with a large sum of money, as well as a set of warriors' armor and weapons. Naturally, they were all top-notch items, but they were nothing compared to Aman's personal collection. Aman was now a 6th-level warrior, and his achievements were not low. From the second day onwards, the 6th-level warrior Aman was promoted to the captain of the Temple of Isis's archives. His monthly salary rose from 5 gold coins to 15 gold coins, and he was given a residence with his own courtyard. His colleagues were extremely envious and congratulated him. Aman didn't care about these things. What he was looking forward to was Gabriel's words that the saintess would summon him when she had time. He really wanted to see Maria. For the past 6 months, he hadn't had the chance to see her face clearly. On the same night that Aman was talking to High Priest Vord and the others, in the distant Assyrian kingdom, in the royal palace of Nineveh, 2 people were having a secret discussion. The one sitting in the middle was the king of Assyria, Sinek, and beside him was the prime minister of Assyria, Lord Alpha. The prime minister was in his 60s, and his body was obviously a little fat. He sat there leaning forward, and his belly stretched the clothes around his waist. He said worriedly, "Your Majesty, it has been 3 days since the Queen and the Imperial Advisor attempted to assassinate the Saintess in Montefiore, but there hasn't been any news." Sinek, the king of Assyria, was not even 40 years old. He was well-built and his eyes were deep. His nose was a little curved, and his appearance was very dignified. He smiled faintly and said, "I know very well how capable Queen Samir is. No one would have thought that someone would try to assassinate her. It's not a problem for her to escape after the attack. With the help of the Imperial Advisor, Faust, it's even more foolproof. Montefiore is tens of thousands of miles away from here. It's normal for no news to reach us in just 3 days. All we have to do is wait." Alpha added, "Your Majesty, if you have such thoughts again, please think twice before you act. You actually sent 2 people who are so important to the kingdom to risk their lives. I didn't expect that you would order Her Majesty the Queen to be an assassin." Sinek smiled again. "Actually, this is the idea of the Imperial Advisor, Faust. He volunteered to do this, and I gave the order in the name of the king. Only then would the Queen do it herself. The imperial advisor is a man of great foresight. Regardless of whether the assassination of the saintess succeeds or not, the three kingdoms will definitely be in chaos for a while, which is most beneficial to Assyria. Alpha was a little puzzled. 3 kingdoms? Are you talking about Igut, Hittite, and Babylon, your majesty? Cynic smiled proudly. That's right. Assassinating the saintess during the blessing ceremony is tantamount to declaring war on the empire of Igut. The pharaohs of Igut, Lazith II, is a proud and ambitious man. How could he give up such a great opportunity to start a war? Alpha asked. Who will he declare war on? Cynic slapped the armrest of his chair. Of course not. The one who is in conflict with Igut is Hittite, which is gradually breaking away from its fate of submitting to the empire of Igut. Alpha asked, then why does Babylon have to be involved? The king blinked his eyes. They won't be able to catch the assassin. Think about it, Prime Minister. Who on the continent has the ability to escape after assassinating the saintess? Who would have the guts to do so? Alpha suddenly reacted, Enkidu and Gilgamesh? Seneca's laughter shook the roof. Prime Minister, your first reaction is the same. It's their fault for being in the limelight. There's no way Lazith II would not have thought of this. Alpha looked worried. Even if everyone is suspicious, what reason would Enkidu and Gilgamesh have to do this? Chapter 95. Almost all the warriors and mages in the city of Memphis were gathered in the square. The security was tight, but the warriors' main duty was to maintain order. No one would have thought that there would be an assassin. There were simply too many people in the square, and it was impossible to prevent people with bad intentions from sneaking in. However, trying to cause trouble in such an occasion was no different from courting death, and yet someone had done so. The assassin's timing was very clever. It was when the milky white light from the golden sky shone, and everyone was kneeling on the ground. Looking at the size of the arrow, only the strongest crossbow could shoot it, but the assassin used a bow. The bowstring was originally wrapped around his waist, and the spine of the bow and the arrow were hidden in a cane. The assassin disguised himself as a hobbling old man. Taking advantage of the people kneeling and praying, he suddenly drew the bow and shot the arrow. His movements were as fast as lightning. Not to mention the power and accuracy of this arrow, even the sudden action of shooting this arrow could only be done by a supreme warrior. It was too difficult for the arrow to hit Maria. How could the adoratress not have protection when she was casting magic? The magic formation was a barrier. The assassin wanted to take advantage of people's relaxation. The arrow was very strange. When it bounced off Amon's spear, it paused in the air for a moment, and then its speed became even faster. This pause was enough for the guards to react. There were 12 supreme warriors under the high platform where the adoratress was casting the spell, and 6 of them were facing this direction. Several swords rose into the sky and almost simultaneously cut the arrow flying in the air. Even if the arrow was made of the strongest material in the world, it would still be smashed to pieces. But something unexpected happened again. There were violent waves of power in the air, but there was no sound. Amon could only sense it using magic detection. Every time the swords cut the arrow trembled as if it had turned into a shadow. The violent vibration made it almost impossible to see it clearly. It paused several times in the air, but did not change direction and continued to fly forward, shooting into the air covered by the magic formation. Amon sucked in a breath of cold air. To be able to shoot such a powerful arrow, it was definitely a rare supreme warrior. But the scene of his javelin and the swords of several supreme warriors intercepting the arrow reminded Amon of a very clever magic, energy magic. There was no such thing as low-level or mid-level in energy magic. The starting point was the high level, and Amon had only just begun to practice it. This kind of magic was very profound and even difficult to understand. All kinds of magic were about communicating with the energy of the outside world and transforming it into the power of the laws of nature, and energy magic was the pure use of energy. Although Amon had never practiced magic before, he had a feeling that the energy contained in this arrow could only be produced by a supreme mage. The impact, conversion, and consumption of energy could not change the direction of the arrow. Before the arrow's power was completely consumed, it would continue to fly towards its target. How was this possible? No one could be both a supreme warrior and a supreme mage. This was the ultimate power of two sides that Amon pursued. Could it be that the assassin was a god? There was another possibility. The crossbow itself was an extremely precious magic artifact, and it was shot by a supreme warrior and a supreme mage at the same time. The warrior shot the arrow with all his strength, and the mage cast energy magic on the arrow. There was no time for Amon to think carefully. He wanted to continue to stop the arrow, but it was too late. He turned around and immediately rushed in the direction of the arrow, taking away the javelin of another warrior as he ran. It was the warrior closest to Amon. He was kneeling on the ground devoutly, not knowing what had happened. The javelin was still in his hand, and he didn't even know that it had been taken away by Amon. The arrow was shot towards the platform. Suddenly, a golden light barrier appeared in the void. The arrow was frozen in the air for about a breath's time, then it passed through the barrier and shot towards Maria. This distance was very close, only a dozen steps away. Maria was standing on the platform, casting an extremely difficult magic. She couldn't move at all if she didn't stop. But at this moment, someone had jumped onto the platform and stood in front of the adoratress. It was Gabriel. The blessings to the people did not stop, and the echoes of the bell were still floating in the square. Maria's body was covered with all kinds of protection, including a transparent air elemental armor, an invisible energy shield, and a divine shield that flashed in and out of the light of the rainbow. At this moment, all the brilliant mages in Montefiore were under the platform. More than half of them were operating the magic circle, but the others were not just for show. They immediately took action to protect the adoratress. Everything happened too fast. It was not a test of people's ability, but their reflexes. Maria could have dodged, but that would mean that the ceremony would be interrupted. She chose to trust the people around her. The protection should be able to block the arrow, but Gabriel couldn't let that happen. She did something inappropriate. Only the adoratress could climb onto the platform, but she jumped onto it. Gabriel swung the sword in her right hand. The silver sword struck the black arrow, causing a violent tremor. The parangan inlaid on the sword's edge was shattered, and the sword itself was broken into several pieces. Then time seemed to stop. Gabriel's left hand held the arrow, and the tip of the arrow touched the armor on her chest. Her grip was very steady. The arrow trembled like a struggling snake. Gabriel's nails were bleeding. The arrow was blocked. When the tremor of the arrow gradually stopped, countless cracks appeared on the body of the arrow, and then it turned into pieces and fell to the ground. Amon did not catch up with the assassin. After shooting the arrow, the assassin had already jumped high and flew to the edge of the square. When Amon turned around, he only saw the back of the assassin. Then, there were people flying in the air and on the ground. They accurately stepped on the narrow space between the crowd and chased the assassin out of the square. On the platform, Maria's lips moved slightly. She gave an order: Vord, lead the mages; Ank, lead the warriors to catch the assassin. Burke, continue to operate the magic circle. Do not interrupt the ceremony. The shadow of the dragon, command the order in the square. There must be no chaos. Vord was a 9th-level mage and the chief high priest of the Temple of Isis. The other two high priests were Julian and Burke. Ank was an 8th-level warrior and the chief guardian of the Temple of Isis. The shadow of the dragon was another supreme warrior. For the first time, Maria publicly gave an order to command these people at the same time. In an emergency, there was no room for hesitation. Vord led 2 supreme mages and Ank led 2 supreme warriors. A total of 6 people chased after the assassin. Looking at the speed of the assassin's escape, ordinary people could not catch up at all. This was a real assassin. Regardless of whether his attack hit or not, he would immediately escape thousands of miles away. If one's reaction was slightly slower, they would not even be able to touch his shadow. Amon couldn't help at all. He turned around and picked up the javelin. When he looked up again, he saw the assassin jump out of the square. The other assassin threw something in the air, which turned into a shuttle in the air. The shuttle wrapped around the 2 of them and flew away. Sure enough, the assassin was not alone. There was another person at the edge of the square to receive him, and he had already prepared a magic artifact to escape. The magic used by the receiver was so brilliant, it was obvious that he was a top supreme mage. The step that the assassin took made Amon feel like he saw a familiar shadow. He had only seen the legendary first warrior of the continent, Enkidu, with such amazing strength and speed, and his figure was too similar. If it was really Enkidu, then the person who received him must be Gilgamesh. These two men were not afraid of anything, even daring to kill the gods. If it was really Enkidu and Gilgamesh, they had the ability to do so, but why would they come to Montefiore to assassinate the Adoratress? It did not make sense in any way, and these two heroes did not look like people who would be assassins. Amon did not see who the two people were, and he only had some doubts in his heart, but he could not be sure. This was a shocking event, but except for the guards around the high platform and Amon in the distance, the hundreds of thousands of people kneeling in the square did not even notice it. Everything happened within a few breaths of the echoing bell. The Adoratress ordered that the ceremony should not be interrupted and that the people should not be alarmed on the spot, and the trackers had already followed the assassin. With 3 supreme mages and 3 supreme warriors, coupled with the protection of the magic formation in Montefiore, it would be difficult for any assassin to escape. When the blessing ceremony was over, as usual, there was a grand carnival, and the people of the city shouted praises to the goddess Isis. This grand ceremony had been expected for 33 years. In the midst of the carnival, there was a hidden tension in the atmosphere of Montefiore. The protection function of the magic formation on the city wall was quietly activated, and the detection function was also turned on to the extreme. The city guards did not participate in the carnival, and patrolling warriors could be seen in every corner. The city of Montefiore looked as if nothing had happened. The Adoratress completed all the ceremonies of the ceremony according to tradition, and at the same time, continued to order more people to track down the assassins. Warriors and priests on duty were not allowed to go home. Amon was transferred to guard the city wall that night, and the next day he returned to the archives of the Temple of Isis. After the blessing ceremony, he received orders not to tell the outside world what he had seen in the square, because the Adoratress did not want to cause panic among the people. The news of the appearance of the assassins at the blessing ceremony of Isis eventually spread inside the Temple of Isis, and Amon also heard the private discussions of his colleagues. It was said that the chief high priest Vord and his men did not catch the assassins and let them escape. On the third night, Amon was suddenly informed that the chief high priest Vord had summoned him. He was taken to a majestic hall, which was not lit with candles or oil lamps, but was decorated with bright parangons, which were actually illuminated by magic. In the hall sat not only the chief high priest Vord, but also the governor of Montefiore, Giatujan, and the supreme warrior Gabriel. To Amon's slight disappointment, Maria was not present. Both the high priest Vord and the governor praised Amon's actions in the square, but it was mainly Gabriel who asked questions. She said approvingly, "The square is too big." More than half of the mages are helping the Adoratress bless the people in the magic circle. The rest of the mages and supreme warriors are also around the high platform. The assassin was at the edge of the square, and there is not a single mage within 100 paces of him. You are not the warrior closest to the assassin. There are 12 people as close as you, and 4 warriors closer to the assassin. I saw the javelin you threw. I didn't expect you to have already achieved the 6th level, and your strength has reached the peak of the 6th level. Apart from you, the highest warrior around the assassin is only the 4th level. No wonder you were the only one who could react. There are 2 main reasons for calling you here today. First, Lord Gia wants to know what reward you would like to receive. The news that there was an assassin at the blessing ceremony will spread sooner or later. The Adoratress has ordered that from tomorrow onwards, there is no need to hide it anymore. You can accept the praise of the people. Second, she wants to know if you saw the assassin's face clearly. Please try your best to remember it. Reward? Amon did not lack money or treasures, so the so-called reward was really unnecessary. He replied respectfully, "My life was saved by the Adoratress at the Nile River. Otherwise, I would have become food for the beasts in the wilderness. With my weak strength, I couldn't have blocked the assassin's arrow. I just tried my best and it was all part of my duty. If I discovered the assassin but failed to stop him immediately, as a warrior on duty, I should be punished. I'm just doing my duty, and I don't ask for any reward. To be honest, I didn't see the assassin's face clearly. When I turned around, he had already flown out of the square. I only saw his back and he was tall and burly. But I have a feeling that this person's movements were very light, as if he had deliberately changed his body shape. As for the other person, I didn't see him clearly at all. It was just a black shadow that disappeared in a flash. He carefully recalled every scene he had seen in the square that day. After listening, the lords looked at each other. Vord nodded and said, I only returned this afternoon after tracking the assassin and didn't catch him. I didn't expect you to see him clearly, but I still have to ask what I should ask. Sorry for making things difficult for a warrior like you. What you just said is very important. Can you tell me the reason? Why did you have that feeling? Amon shook his head and said, I can't describe it. I've been thinking about the scene for the past few days, and I just feel that the assassin's figure doesn't match his posture. It's just a feeling, and there's no clear reason for it. Gia said, Brave warrior, you probably don't know how terrifying the person you faced was, but you still charged forward. Your fearless spirit is worthy of praise. Although you don't ask for any reward as the governor, I must reward you. This is an order that cannot be refused. May I ask if you have anything else to say? Amon raised his head and said, Since that's the case, I thank the governor. Actually, I just want to ask if the Saintess is doing well? Gabriel said, Of course the Saintess is safe and sound. She has a lot of things to deal with these few days. Amon, you can leave first. The Saintess will summon you when she's free. The governor of Montefiore rewarded him with a large sum of money, as well as a set of warriors' armor and weapons. Naturally, they were all top-notch items, but they were nothing compared to Amon's personal collection. Amon was now a 6th-level warrior, and his achievements weren't low at all. From the second day onwards, the 6th-level warrior Amon was promoted to the captain of the Temple of Isis's archives. His monthly salary rose from 5 gold coins to 15 gold coins, and he was given a residence with his own courtyard. His colleagues were extremely envious and congratulated him. Amon didn't care about these things, but he was looking forward to Gabriel's words that the Saintess would summon him when she's free. He really wanted to see Maria. For the past 6 months, he hadn't had the chance to see her face clearly. On the same night that Amon and Vord were talking, in the distant kingdom of Assur, in the royal palace of Nineveh, 2 people were having a secret conversation. The one sitting in the middle was the king of Assur, Sinek, and beside him was the prime minister of Assur, Lord Alpha. The prime minister was in his 60s, and he was obviously a little chubby. His body leaned forward, and his belly tightened the clothes around his waist. He said worriedly, Your Majesty, it's been 3 days since the Queen and the Imperial Advisor tried to assassinate the Saintess in Montefiore, but there hasn't been any news from them. The king of Assur, Sinek, was less than 40 years old. He was well-built and his eyes were deep. His nose was a little curved, and his appearance was very dignified. He smiled faintly and said, I know very well how capable Queen Samir is. No one would think that someone would try to assassinate her. It's not a problem for her to escape after the attack. With the help of the Imperial Advisor, Faust, it's even more foolproof. Montefiore is tens of thousands of miles away from here. It's normal for no news to reach us in just 3 days. We just have to wait. Prime Minister Alpha continued, Your Majesty, if you have such thoughts again, you must think twice before you act. You actually sent 2 people who are so important to the kingdom to risk their lives. I never thought that you would order Her Majesty the Queen to be assassins. Sinek smiled again. Actually, this is the idea of the Imperial Advisor, Faust. He volunteered to do this, and I gave the order in the name of the king. That's why the Queen acted personally. The Imperial Advisor is a man of great foresight. Whether or not the assassination of the Saintess succeeds, the 3 kingdoms will definitely be in chaos for a while, which is most beneficial to Assur. Alpha was a little puzzled. 3 kingdoms? Are you talking about Igut, Hittite, and Babylon, Your Majesty? Sinek smiled proudly. That's right. Assassinating the saintess during the blessing ceremony is tantamount to declaring war on the empire of Igut. The pharaohs of Igut, Lazith II, is a proud and ambitious man. How could he give up such a great opportunity to start a war? Alpha asked, who will he declare war on? Cynic slapped the armrest of his chair. Of course not. The one who is in conflict with Igut is Hittite, which is gradually breaking away from its fate of submitting to the empire of Igut. Alpha, then why does it involve Baron? The king blinked. They won't be able to catch the assassins. Think about it, Prime Minister. Who on the continent would have the ability to escape after assassinating the saintess? And who would have the guts to do so? Alpha suddenly reacted, Enkidu and Gilgamesh? Seneca's laughter shook the roof. Prime Minister, your first reaction is the same. It's their fault for being in the limelight. There's no way Lazith II would not have thought of this. Alpha looked worried. Even if everyone is suspicious, what reason would Enkidu and Gilgamesh have to do this? Chapter 96. The king of Assyria shrugged. I don't know why. You'll have to ask them themselves. Even the most arrogant person on the continent would not be able to tolerate such suspicion and questioning. Although Queen Samir did not disguise herself as Enkidu, she disguised herself as Enkidu. Her bow and arrows are made of snake tendons and fangs. Everyone on the continent knows that Enkidu and Gilgamesh killed Humbaba and obtained the tendons and fangs. The supreme mages of Montefiore will definitely recognize these weapons. Alpha said with lingering fear, it's not a good idea to offend these two people. We must keep this a secret. It's just two people, I'm not afraid of them. Even if the kingdom of Babylon wants to declare war on me, I'd still like to try my luck. But you're right, this is a top secret of the kingdom. Only you and I can know about it, and we can't reveal it to anyone. Cynic snorted coldly, they're just two people. The Prime Minister wiped his forehead and whispered, Your Majesty, I still think that your decision is too risky. Next time something as important as this happens, can you inform me in advance so that I can plan it properly? The king waved his hand and said, Alpha, it's not that I don't trust you. You are the most loyal minister in the Assyrian kingdom. But the assassination of the adoratress in Montefiore must not be leaked. If they are prepared, the queen and the grand tutor will not be able to escape. So, I didn't tell anyone. Alpha sighed softly. Your Majesty's decision may be right. You summon me for a secret meeting at night. What can I do for you and for the kingdom? The king of Sennac also sighed. Prime Minister, you have many things to do. Reorganize the army and prepare to cross the plateau at any time. Build a new city on the fertile land and expand the kingdom's territory. I have a burning ambition, but the Saya Plateau has not only protected our land, but it has also imprisoned my ambition. My kingdom's land is barren and its borders are narrow. Although our warriors are brave and skilled in battle, they have always been trapped outside the highlands. To the west of the Euphrates River, 1,000 miles of fertile land will appear. It is the perfect opportunity for me to expand my territory and build my legacy. I want to be a king who will be revered by my subjects for generations to come. But the other 3 countries will not give up. Only by provoking them will the Assyrian army have the chance to cross the plateau and occupy it first. While they were talking, someone outside the palace announced loudly, Her Majesty the Queen has returned. The imperial tutor requests an audience. Before he could finish his sentence, a woman walked in. She was wearing tight clothes and her long black hair was tied up. She did not wear any jewelry. It was Queen Samir of the Assyrian kingdom. If Aman were here, he would be shocked, because she was the assassin who tried to assassinate Maria in Montefiore. He never thought it would be a woman. Samir's figure was petite, and the tight-fitting outfit accentuated her curves even more. Such a delicate body seemed to contain a dynamic tension, as if it was the perfect combination of a gentle body and a resolute temperament. Her facial features were soft, and her eyes were dark brown, giving her a mysterious charm. King Cynic stood up from his seat and welcomed her with open arms. My dear queen, you are back so soon. Did everything go well? Samir gave her husband a hug, then took a step back and nodded. The assassination of the adoratress did not succeed, but it doesn't matter. Your Majesty's plan should be successful. It's just that the adoratress' calmness is beyond my imagination. She may be the youngest supreme mage on the continent today. Then she turned to Alpha and nodded. So the Prime Minister is here as well. I think the king must have something to discuss with you. I'm tired, I'm going to rest now. Alpha hurriedly got up and bowed. Your Majesty, you have worked hard. Samir then turned to the king and said, the imperial tutor is just outside the door. You can ask him about the details. Then she walked into the back of the palace. Her attitude was cold and arrogant, and she did not use honorifics when talking to the king. After the queen left, the Prime Minister whispered to the king, Your Majesty, the queen doesn't look very well. She seems to be angry. She will not be happy that you sent her so far away to carry out a dangerous assassination mission. You haven't seen each other for many days, and she rushed back to Nineveh overnight. Your Majesty, if there is anything you want to discuss, we can talk about it tomorrow. Tonight, try to comfort the queen and express your concern. Cynic looked somewhat embarrassed. He coughed and said, The queen is tired and needs a good rest. I am the king, and I must prioritize the affairs of the state. The imperial tutor is still waiting outside. Invite him in to discuss the matter. There was a difference in status between the king and his vassal. Queen Samir could enter the inner palace directly, but Faust could only enter after being notified. The supreme mage was in his 50s, but he looked like an old man in his 70s or 80s. His curly hair was completely gray, and his face was full of wrinkles. He looked very haggard. 3 days and 3 nights of non-stop travel was indeed very tiring. On the other hand, his appearance was completely different from the pampered supreme mages. Faust was the chief elder of the Asur Magic Academy. It was said that he was the most knowledgeable person in the entire kingdom. He could recite every page and paragraph of the books in the Asur Magic Academy and the Asur Main Shrine accurately. His thirst for knowledge exceeded that of everyone else in the kingdom, and his greatest hobby was to collect all kinds of ancient books. Any precious book that he had never read before would be read over and over again in his hands before he could put it down. Faust himself once said, Knowledge is the pursuit. I want to find the power to change the world and life. In the kingdom of Asur, he was known as the Sage Tutor. This was not an official title, but later, everyone, including the king, called him by it. The imperial tutor had become an honorific title exclusive to Faust. The king gave Faust a seat and asked kindly, Esteemed imperial tutor, I didn't expect you to return so quickly. How many flying scrolls did you use? There's no need to travel so hard. It's fine as long as you come back safely. Faust smiled bitterly. Her Majesty just wanted to return to the capital as soon as possible. Although I drove the shadow shuttle, I still used all the flying scrolls. Alpha was surprised. All of them? Then you have been flying for 3 days and 3 nights without stopping. No wonder you came back so quickly, and you look so tired. Faust replied, This little bit of tiredness is nothing if I can make a contribution to the kingdom. The plan was presented to Her Majesty by me, so of course it should be done by me. The assassination of the adoratress was not successful, but our goal should have been achieved. We should now get ready, and when the conflict starts, we can move quietly. King Cynic said, I was just discussing this matter with the Prime Minister. We have to cross the plateau and prepare to build a city. We have to start now, and we can't alert the others. 1,000 miles of fertile land will appear in the center of the continent. Do you think that the other kingdoms will know about this? Faust sighed softly. I have a hunch that the other kingdoms will certainly have their own experts. Even if they didn't react at the time, but more than 2 years have passed, and a large area of fertile land has emerged from the swamp. Everyone will know what is going to happen. Moreover, we are thinking, won't the gods find out about all this? When the time comes, they will certainly guide the people. Alpha continued, I have studied the terrain there. The first large area of fertile land that is exposed from the swamp is near the foot of the Saya Plateau, while the other 3 sides are still surrounded by the swamp. Crossing the plateau is our obstacle, but the swamp will block the armies of the other 3 kingdoms. So in terms of geographical environment, the kingdom of Asur is the most advantageous. Faust took out his staff, and a shadow appeared in the void. It was the terrain around the town of Duk. He pointed to the inland lake at the northernmost end of the desert and said, "The armies can't enter the swamp for the time being, but that lake is a good place to set up a camp. The war will happen earlier. Only when they fight each other will we have the opportunity to quietly enter the south of the Saya Plateau and establish a foothold. As the area of fertile land above the water expands, the territory we occupy will gradually expand until it extends to the whole territory. Only then will we be invincible." The king frowned as if he was thinking. He asked again, "The empire of Igut is the most ambitious and the most powerful. It has long wanted to cross the desert and make all the other kingdoms surrender to it. What it wants most is such a piece of territory. And this territory is in the territory of the Hittite kingdom. Sooner or later, the war between the two kingdoms will break out. The assassination of the adoratress is just an excuse. In your opinion, when should it happen?" Faust thought for a moment and said, "War is not easy. The supply lines of both kingdoms are very long. Even if they want to start a war, they will have to make a lot of preparations. A large-scale war will take at least a year and a half. Prime Minister, will we be ready in this period of time?" Alpha narrowed his eyes and said, "It's not easy to cross the plateau with a large army. The giants are the most suitable as the vanguard. At the beginning, the area of land above the swamp will not be very large, and it will be divided into many islands. We will spread out along the foot of the Saya Plateau and slowly move forward. As long as we are not disturbed, the preparation work will not be a problem." Amon, who was far away in Montefiore, probably did not know that the journey back to his homeland would be full of dangers. Princess Sicila had already helped guide the giants to quietly enter the swamp and find an island to build their tribe. The king of Assur, on the other hand, was even more ambitious. He wanted to occupy thousands of miles of fertile land and open up a new territory to the south of the Saya Plateau. To achieve this goal, he even further intensified the conflict between the kingdoms by sending assassins to assassinate the adoratress. Amon lived a peaceful life during this period. He was now the captain of the guards, in charge of dozens of warriors and 2 slaves who took care of his daily life. Amon was not used to having slaves work by his side. Usually, he only asked them to clean the yard, and if he needed anything, he would give them money to buy it. This made life a lot more convenient. The guards had routine drills. In terms of fighting skills, Amon was not inferior to anyone. However, the cooperation between warriors, the coordination between warriors and mages, the use of various weapons, and the use of various equipment in different situations were all subjects of study. Amon had learned a lot. The captain of the guards seemed to be serious, but in comparison he was the most easygoing person. When he was happy, he was like a child. As the captain of the guards, he had more opportunities to read the books in hieroglyphs alone, which happened to be a good time for him to practice supreme magic. In the temple of Isis, it was not convenient for him to show off his magic, so he could only practice the power of various magic in secret. However, some magic needed to be performed to verify the results of his practice, so sometimes Amon would go out of the temple and spend the night outside. People thought that the captain of the guards was relaxing, but in fact, he was looking for a secluded place to verify the effects of the supreme magic. This made Amon feel inconvenient, so he began to think about buying a mansion in Montefiore. At the very least, he needed a place to put Schrödinger. After coming to Igut, the cat did not live with Amon in the temple of Isis. The main goddess of the temple of Isis was Isis, but almost all the gods of the Igut pantheon were also worshipped in the various side temples, including Batet, the servant of Osiris. The statue of Batet was very unique. On the body of a slender girl was the head of a cat, and with long hair, it looked like a lion. Because the goddess Batet was the image of a cat, cats were worshipped and loved in the Igut. There was also a more practical and traditional reason why cats were loved by people. A long time ago, the Igut was often infested with rats. After some people introduced domesticated cats, they became good helpers in guarding the granaries. Every year, they saved a lot of food for the people of the Igut, so of course they were grateful. There were many cats living around the temple of Isis, neither wild cats nor domestic cats. They lay lazily under the wall or in the square all day long, basking in the sun. People passing by liked to feed cats, and the priests in the temple would also put cat food at a fixed place every day, symbolizing the sacrifice to the people of Batet. When Aman first entered the temple of Isis, Schrödinger jumped out of his leather bag and slipped away, then mixed into the various cats in the square, and it was too late to chase him. Schrödinger was very familiar with the place, and it felt like home. It was no wonder that it was stolen by Belle from Montefiore, and its request to Aman was to take me back to Igut. Aman never knew what Schrödinger was thinking or what it wanted to do. It was the cat that guided him, and he could not control where Schrödinger wanted to go. Living in the temple of Isis and not being able to see the cat, it was inevitable that he would feel strange. After all, in the loneliest time of his life, there was a scary cat that accompanied and helped him through the difficult times. Whether Schrödinger wanted to use him or had other purposes, Aman was grateful. It was not that Aman could not see Schrödinger. Every time he went out alone, outside the temple, a cat would suddenly jump out and rub against his leg, and when he looked closely, he would see that it was Schrödinger. Aman would look for a secluded place to practice magic, and Schrödinger would follow him to watch, squatting there with its chin in one paw and tilting its head, looking very interested. Every time he saw Schrödinger, Aman would buy the best wine. Later, he developed a habit of simply buying good wine and carrying it with him. Seeing that the captain liked good wine, his subordinates often gave him some. Aman did not know where Schrödinger usually hung out, but after returning to Igut, the cat grew more and more beautiful and energetic. Its body was slim and vigorous, and the color of its fur had become smooth and bright. When it jumped and ran, it was very agile. In the open areas of the wild, Aman had to use all his strength to keep up. Obviously, it had completely recovered its vitality. If it were not for the pattern, Aman could hardly recognize the cat, but there was one obvious characteristic of Schrödinger, and that was that it could not be detected by detection magic. Schrödinger was still very arrogant, and the way it looked at Aman was like a high and mighty king looking at his people, but its attitude was much closer. Every time it saw Aman, it was obviously happy, otherwise it would not jump out and rub against his leg, which was unimaginable in the past. In addition to looking for opportunities to go out from time to time and meet with Schrödinger, Aman was also waiting for Maria to summon him. But the adoratress was very busy during this time. It was said that she had left for the capital of Igut to discuss important matters with His Majesty Pharaoh, which may have something to do with the last assassination. A month later, the adoratress returned to Montefiore, and the first person who came to see Aman was Gabriel. Gabriel called Aman alone to a warrior's hall, which was the place where the supreme warrior usually handled his official duties. The reliefs on the left and right walls were the images of the supreme warriors of the past, depicting various battle scenes. Gabriel invited him to sit down and said, "Aman, the adoratress has already instructed me to give you pointers on body arts when I have time, but I have been too busy for some time, and only today did I have time to look for you." Aman hurriedly said, "I know you are very busy." Some time ago, the adoratress was about to break through to the 7th level, and also had to prepare for the blessing ceremony of Isis. There was an assassination incident at the ceremony, and I have to trouble Lord Gabriel with such trivial matters. Gabriel looked at him and suddenly asked, "Aman, how old are you this year?" Aman replied with some embarrassment, "I'm almost 17. Gabriel exclaimed softly, "Amazing, at this age, your achievements have surpassed mine. As long as you do not take the wrong path, you will definitely become a supreme warrior. The adoratress is right. If I am not mistaken, you obtained the opportunity to break through in the encounter on the Nile River, and after coming to Montefiore, your strength increased while recovering, and you became a 6th-level warrior." Aman nodded and said, "Yes, you are right." Gabriel added, "Everyone's experience is different, but there are always some encounters that are similar. When I first broke through from the 5th level to the 6th level, it was also during a battle on a mission. At that time, if it were not for the presence of the Supreme Mage Vord, I might have died, but after coming back, the growth of my strength broke through the previous limit. It was like I had experienced a new life." Aman nodded repeatedly and said, "I feel the same. It was indeed a difficult experience, and you are now a supreme warrior. If you can give me pointers, What will I experience from the 6th level to the 7th level? Gabriel smiled faintly. No one can say for sure, but to tell you the truth, I have actually forgotten. Chapter 97. Gabriel explained. To be exact, I didn't realize it at the time. It was 5 years ago, when I was sent to carry out a mission to kill mutant monsters that often attacked the villages in the mountains. The situation was very dangerous. Someone told me privately that a priest wanted to take this opportunity to get rid of me, so he suggested that I be sent to carry out that mission. A kind-hearted person advised me not to take the risk and to be more careful. I only needed to kill a few ordinary monsters at the edge of the mountains and report back. When I arrived there, I also realized that the situation was indeed like this, and that I, a 6th-level warrior, shouldn't have been sent. But when I saw the villagers in the villages being attacked by the monsters, the lonely widows and children crying in front of me. Their fathers and husbands had died under the claws of the monsters, and they regarded me as the messenger of the gods, and all their hope. I prayed in the simple temple, and the statue did not speak, but just looked at me. At that time, I closed my eyes and listened to the voice from my heart. What was the meaning of accepting this mission? What was the oath I made when I became a warrior? I didn't come here because I was framed, and I didn't do anything to avoid being framed. My heart was finally at peace. The next day, I walked into the mountains with my sword, and came out after 7 days and 7 nights. I killed 13 mutant monsters that attacked the villagers, for the mission I shouldered, for the oath I made. I knew why I was sent, but since I was here, I had to be clear about the real pursuit in my heart. I didn't kill those mutant monsters for the sake of a priest in the temple. I was born into a noble family, and I have been able to practice low-level magic through the second awakening of my power. Although my mastery of basic magic is not as profound as that of specialized mages, I have always been focused on basic meditation. On the night I returned to the village, I suddenly felt a sense of relief in the silence. From then on, I achieved the 7th level and became a supreme warrior. This was not expected in advance, so I said I forgot, because I didn't think about it at all. Amon couldn't help but lean forward and ask, "Can you explain it more clearly?" Gabriel smiled bitterly and said, "My eloquence isn't very good, so I can't describe it very precisely. Or rather, it's a sense of fusion. What I want and what I do, my soul and my will, my yearning and my path, my strength and my spirit are all fused together. There's no difference. This is a completely different experience from a 6th-level warrior. If one day you also have this kind of achievement, you will be able to experience it for yourself." After returning from Gabriel's place, Amon had been thinking for a few days. The Supreme Warrior didn't know how she became a Supreme Warrior, but she told Amon how she broke through, which was also a very important inspiration. Amon had a feeling that this kind of breakthrough was very similar to the faith fusion test of practicing divine arts. Before Maria became a Supreme Mage, the books she read were hymns written by the adoratress from 100 years ago, not magic manuals. It seemed that whether it was body arts or magic, in order to achieve the 7th level, in addition to hard work, it was more important to have a breakthrough in the mind. What Gabriel said, Amon also repeatedly asked himself if what he wanted and what he did, his soul and his will, his yearning and his path, his strength and his spirit, were they all fused into one. After thinking about it, Amon felt that he hadn't done it. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but that his experience and skills hadn't reached that level. It was like drawing a picture. Not only should all the outlines be outlined in one's mind, but one must also be able to draw it perfectly with the outline in one's mind. Since Gabriel said that he had forgotten, Amon didn't deliberately think about it. He just honestly practiced the 6th level of body arts and magic. With the 6th level of body arts, the power awakened in the blood was not only stronger, but it could also stimulate the resonance of energy from the inside out. Although Amon could do this before, he could use it more freely at this moment. What did this mean? A warrior could also fight against magic. The effect of magic was nothing more than a kind of communication and transformation of energy. Absolute power could still compete with it, especially in close combat. A 6th-level mage could practice high-level magic, which meant that he could master the laws that he didn't understand before. The first magic that Amon practiced was the very difficult spatial magic. If it were another mage, he might choose a powerful and easier to learn, such as fire magic. At this time, Amon wasn't inexperienced. He had read enough books and knew how to learn it more easily, but he still chose the one that he wanted to learn the most. If the 4 special parangons and the god's tear were embedded in the iron branch staff, it might be comparable to the staff of the adoratress. But Amon didn't. He didn't want to use the god's tear in Montefiore in case something unexpected happened. That bone was the best staff he had at the moment, but there was one inconvenience: it was too heavy. Only by mastering high-level spatial magic could he solve this problem. For a mage, it was too convenient to have a spatial artifact that could be used freely. Without the bone, Amon would have died many times. Crazy, Ol probably didn't expect that Amon would get Osiris' rib, but he prepared a spatial artifact for Amon in advance, the refined Ventuculum. The Ventuculum itself was worth 300 parangons, which was already a treasure in the world. After being refined into a spatial artifact by the continent's top artificer, it was hard to measure its value, because it was almost impossible for a mage to sell it. It took Amon 3 months to master the basics of advanced spatial magic, and he finally managed to open the magical space in the Ventuculum. He was still only a 6th-level mage and couldn't make full use of the artifact. He could only store or take things. The space a spatial artifact could use was also related to the user's magic. The higher the level, the more space it could use, but the artifact itself had its limits. Amon still couldn't open the space in the Ventuculum to the limit, but it was enough for him to store all his belongings. Only now did he realize that there were differences in the levels of spatial artifacts. The Ventuculum left by Crazy Ol was of a higher level than the one left by Nero. If it was that ring, only a supreme mage could open it. Of course, the bone was of a higher level. Amon opened it when he achieved the 3rd level. There was another rule in spatial artifacts. An artifact that opened a space could not be put into another spatial artifact. For example, if Amon opened the space in the Ventuculum to store something, he couldn't put the parangon into Nero's space ring, and vice versa, because the space couldn't be extended infinitely. But then Amon discovered another amazing thing. The bone was not restricted by this rule. He could still put the Ventuculum into the bone after he had stored something. Looking through precious books in the archives of the highest standards, Amon realized that this was not an ordinary magic artifact. It was called a sacred artifact or a divine artifact. A divine artifact could change according to a supreme mage's magical power. In other words, if it was a spatial artifact, the space it could expand could theoretically be infinite, but in fact, the space it could expand was limited by the magical power of the user. Back then, Amon had expanded the bone into an invisible ship, which was the smallest form that this spatial artifact could expand into. But now, the space that Amon had expanded the bone was still so large. It seemed that if he wanted to stimulate more changes in this artifact, his ability was still not enough. When Amon mastered supreme spatial magic, he no longer felt heavy when he picked up the bone or the Ventuculum. This could be described as a kind of putting down. In the past, it was equivalent to him carrying a heavy object, but when he used supreme spatial magic, it was like putting the heavy object on the ground. The weight was still there, but it was borne by the earth. This description might not be accurate, because it was another space opened up by magic. Amon had an inexplicable thought. What if such a magical space did not rely on a spatial artifact to expand, but used spatial magic to create a vast and stable space? When Bear died, he sealed off a space that was not opened by Amon until 30 years later, but it did not look like another independent space. Perhaps only the gods could do it. Amon had once entered the underworld of the Anunnaki realm. Was it such a space? Amon could only guess. It was too early to confirm this question. At noon on the 2nd day after Amon mastered the first supreme magic, a subordinate reported that someone was looking for him outside the temple. Ordinary people could not enter and leave the temple of Isis at will. Fortunately, Amon was now the captain of the guards and had some status, so someone would report to him. Amon walked out of a small door on the west side of the temple complex and was surprised to see Medanzo. This warrior of the capital of Babylon had now regained his noble status. Although he was dressed like an ordinary civilian, it could not hide his youthful spirit. He looked handsome and hearty. When he saw Amon, he was elated. Before Madanzo could speak, Amon quickly walked up and pulled him away from the temple. Turning into a remote alley, he asked in a low voice, "Didn't we agree to meet at Link's tribe? How did you come to Montefiore, and how did you find me?" Madanzo grabbed his arm and said, "My God, your deeds have spread to Babylon, and I came to see you after hearing about it. Now that you are the captain of the guards of the Temple of Isis, do you still have time to go to Link's tribe?" Amon was stunned. "What did I do? How did it spread to Babylon? How did you hear about it? Tell me everything in detail. Don't talk here. Where do you live?" "Madanzo, I live in the house of the merchant Sayo in Montefiore. He treats me very well." Amon was stunned again. "Sayo, how do you know him and live in his house?" It was a long story. Madanzo explained as they walked, and Amon got the gist of it. Sayo was a merchant, and he also had a business in Cape States, mainly engaged in trade with the Kingdom of Babylon. Some time ago, he had a caravan to go to Uruk, and because the goods were very valuable, Sayo went in person again and spent a lot of money to hire enough bodyguards. He had a big business with the merchant Leskutli in Uruk, and he lived in Leskutli's house. Leskutli asked him why he had not come in person for so long. Sayo sighed as he drank. "Brother, I almost lost my life when I left from your place last time." Under the influence of alcohol, Sehather began to talk about his experience in the desert. He told them that the caravan had encountered some fierce bandits. Only he and Aesop survived and were rescued by a warrior. The warrior was called Amon, and he also knew Leskutli. He did not mention that the bandits were the night wolves, but the experience was indeed thrilling. Next, Sayo began to brag, because he had met a great hero, and they became friends through thick and thin. Amon was a 6th-level warrior, only a little bit away from becoming a 7th-level supreme warrior. He had obtained the staff of the Oracle of Cape and a large number of precious treasures in the mountains, and he had returned them from thousands of miles away. The governor and supreme mages of the Cape States all thanked and praised him, and he was even praised by the Adoratress and became an honorary warrior of the Temple of Isis. Then he asked, "Did you hear that before I came, something big happened in Montefiore? At the blessing ceremony of the goddess Isis, there was an assassin who dared to assassinate the Adoratress." At this point, Leskutli hurriedly interrupted him and ordered all the servants around him to leave. He lowered his voice and said, "Brother Sayo, the assassination of the Adoratress is a taboo topic in Uruk. If you drink too much outside, don't talk about it, or you'll be beaten up without even knowing what happened." Sayo was startled and asked in confusion, "What does this have to do with Uruk?" Leskutli sighed and said, "This matter has already spread. Haven't you heard the discussions? Many people speculate that the only people on the continent who have the ability and courage to do so are our governor, Gilgamesh, and his brother, Lord Enkidu. These two lords are indomitable heroes, respected by the people here. How can they stand such unwarranted suspicion? Even the people of Uruk feel that it is an insult." Sayo let out a long breath and said, "I see. Thank you for the reminder. I won't dare to talk about it here." Leskutli continued to ask, "It's fine to talk to me here alone, but how did this matter involve Amon?" Sayo's expression became proud again. "It was my friend Amon who first discovered the assassin and rushed to fight with the assassin, stopping the assassination. Later, he was rewarded by the governor of Montefiore and the chief high priest of the temple and promoted to the captain of the guards." Leskutli asked in disbelief, "The captain of the guards of the entire temple of Isis? There are more than a dozen supreme warriors in the temple of Isis. It was Amon who stopped the assassination. Didn't several supreme mages and supreme warriors fail to catch the assassin? How can Amon be so capable?" Sayo explained reluctantly, "Of course not the captain of the guards of the entire temple of Isis. That is the position of Lord Ankh. Amon is the captain of the guards of the archives, which is already very honorable. Of course, the assassination was not stopped by Amon alone, but he was the first to stop the assassin. He is my savior and good friend. His glory is also my glory. I don't know how many people envy me. Aman was not only the savior of Sayo, but also the savior of Leskutli. As far as Leskutli knew, Aman was a sorcerer. How could he become an honorable warrior of the temple in Montefiore? This young man's experience was really legendary. But Leskutli's character was much more stable than Sayo's. He did not tell Sayo about his encounter on the Babylon River, nor could he tell Sayo that Aman was a sorcerer. He just listened to him boast while drinking. As the two were talking, a servant outside the door reported that the master's benefactor had sent someone to return the carriage. Leskutli was taken aback. He was just talking about Aman when Aman actually sent someone to return the carriage. Although Aman had already said that he would return the carriage, the merchant did not expect Aman to keep his word. He hurriedly went out to greet the person who came, but it turned out to be Madanzo. Madanzo was already a noble warrior of the capital. He came in high spirits, so Leskutli naturally had to receive him respectfully. When Madanzo returned to Babylon City with Princess Sisela, he regained his noble status. Princess Sisela told him that it would not be easy to regain his title and fief. Since he was familiar with the caveman tribe in the mountains, he might as well complete a task. God Marduk would protect him. Fortunately, Aman had reminded Madanzo before he left. He accepted the task, but did not promise anything. He only said that he would give it a try and left the capital for the west. He planned to cross the Babylon River at the city of Kish and once again passed by the town of Arcade. Mayor Tichjo had been promoted to the deputy chief of the finance department of the city, but there were still many old friends who had rescued Princess Sisela with him. Madanzo was warmly welcomed. He stayed in the same inn and found that the carriage was still there, which meant that Aman had not returned. Before Aman left, he had asked Madanzo to leave the carriage in the inn and leave a sum of money for the innkeeper, stating that the carriage and horses were borrowed by Leskutli and had to be returned. Madanzo knew Aman's temper very well. He would always keep his promise. It seemed that something had delayed him. Anyway, it was still early to meet Aman, so he might as well help him settle the matter. He told the innkeeper and drove the carriage to the city of Uruk, where he found Leskutli's house. Chapter 98. At first, Leskut was worried that Aman's identity as a sorcerer would bring him trouble or danger, but now it seemed that the possibility was very small. Aman had worked side by side with Prince Binut and rescued Princess Sisela from the giant's tribe. He had connections with two of the most distinguished figures in the kingdom. Who would want to offend such a person for no reason? As long as Aman didn't say it himself, no one would question whether he was a sorcerer or not. This young man is really something. He's involved in everything. Madanzo learned about Aman's recent situation from Sayo. He didn't expect that Aman's experience after he broke up with him would be so interesting. In Madanzo's mind, Aman was like a god. Even if he did something miraculous, it wouldn't be surprising. Now that he knew where Aman was, he made a request to Sayo. He asked him to accompany his caravan back to Montefiore to find Aman as a bodyguard. Of course, Sayo agreed. Madanzo was a noble warrior in the capital of Babylon Kingdom. In order to see Aman, he was willing to lower himself to be Sayo's bodyguard. This made Sayo feel very flattered. When they arrived at Montefiore, Madanzo wanted to find an inn to stay in. However, how could the enthusiastic Sayo let him go? He insisted that Madanzo stay at his home and treat him well. As they talked, they arrived at Sayo's mansion. Hearing the news, Sayo hurried to the front hall and bowed. "Lord Aman, it's been a long time. Sayo has been looking forward to your visit." Aman quickly stopped him. "No need to be so polite. I haven't changed much in front of you. Don't call me Lord. I'm not a noble." Sayo said, "You are already the captain of the guards in the temple of Isis. Your status is much more distinguished than that of the common nobles. You haven't come to my house for 3 months. Coincidentally, Lord Madanzo is also here. We must have a few drinks today." Aman couldn't refuse, so he held a banquet at Sayo's residence that very day. During the banquet, Sayo was drunk, and he vented his dissatisfaction over Aman's identity. He held a glass of wine and said, "With your achievements, you should have become a lord long ago. It seems that you are the only one who became the captain of the temple guards as a commoner. I heard that the saintess takes special care of you. Why didn't you make such a request?" Amon explained with a bitter smile, "I've already received enough rewards for what I've done. As a commoner warrior, I've been promoted to a guard captain of the archives. How could I ask for more? Furthermore, such a request is against the Empire's laws." Sayo muttered drunkenly, "The laws of the Empire are really strict. No matter how much money you have, it's difficult to become a noble. The noble status of the Empire of Igut could only be obtained in two ways. One was hereditary, and the other was a special gift. The second way was very difficult. One had to make great contributions to the Empire, be specially recommended by the nobles above the castellan of the city-state, and be approved by the decree of the pharaoh. This kind of contribution was mainly military exploits or merits praised by the people. Amon had only thrown a spear at the ceremony. He was loyal to his duty, but he hadn't reached that level yet. If someone could become a supreme warrior, it wouldn't be difficult to obtain the status of a noble. But the hope of a commoner becoming a supreme warrior by learning body arts was too slim. Sayo's dissatisfaction was also for himself to hear. He was a very rich businessman, but wealth alone couldn't change his identity as a commoner. He once said that if he could obtain the status of a noble lord, he would even give up half of his property. Unfortunately, he didn't have the chance. Amon and Madanzo listened to Sayo's complaints for the whole night. It wasn't until the night that they had a chance to talk alone. Madanzo was already a 5th-level warrior and mage. He said to Amon with emotion, "The determination of faith and the temptation of the devil may be difficult to face. But after I recovered from the pain, my life seemed to have changed. My faith became clearer and I passed the test quickly. Amon, I don't know how to express my gratitude. You are the God who guides me." Amon also said with emotion, "Faith comes from your heart. I didn't force you to do anything. There are some things that I don't want to be like that. With your character, it's not easy for you to not make a promise to the princess. No wonder you passed the test of the devil's temptation. Of course, I'm not saying that the princess is a devil, nor am I saying that the title of a noble is a devil. You should understand. Now that you have achieved the 5th level, have you ever stopped practicing?" Madanzo grinned. "Amonius, you know my ambition and pursuit. I used to want to restore my noble status and the glory of my ancestors. But when I became a noble again, I realized that what I really want is another kind of transcendence, to walk on the path you have pointed out. Except for a few days when I was traveling with you, I have been practicing the power of two sides. It has become my life." Amon nodded thoughtfully. The cultivation of the power of two sides, it obtains a kind of power, but at the same time, it is also a kind of consciousness that one takes for granted. Forgetting it but possessing it naturally may be the true pursuit. Madanzo, since you have embarked on this path, I hope you will remember this. Madanzo temporarily stayed in the city of Montefiore. Amon gave him a task, to buy a house in the city as a temporary residence. He was also given a document to prove his identity. On it was written the name Allah. Of course, it was convenient to have subordinates. But there were some things that could not be left to the subordinates. Madanzo came at the right time. Amon was rich enough to buy the most suitable place. On the west side of the city, Madanzo bought a large house. It was the manor of a fallen noble. Not only did it have a front yard and a backyard, but there was also a small independent garden. There was even a fountain in the spacious front hall. There was also a small private shrine in the backyard, used for worship and meditation. It seemed that the owner of the manor had been a mage many years ago. Now it had become Amon's house. Madanzo took care of everything. He also hired a group of servants, such as gatekeepers and grooms. Madanzo became the housekeeper. The real Allah rarely showed up. It was said that he was very busy. Amon also brought Schrödinger into the house. Madanzo knew the cat and told everyone to be respectful to Schrödinger. It was the cat that Amon kept. But Schrödinger did not like living here. Most of the time, it was still hanging out with the idol cats outside the temple of Isis. Amon could not find it, so he could only wait for it to jump out. In order to make Schrödinger like it, Amon ordered people to replace the statue of the god in the shrine in the backyard with the Igut cat goddess Batet. Every day, the best wine and fresh and delicious grilled fish were served. Whether Schrödinger came or not, the food was prepared for it. In this way, Schrödinger would come every day and sneak away after eating and drinking. It seemed that he was very satisfied with this arrangement. Maria persuaded Amon to stay in the temple of Isis and become an honorable warrior in public. The main purpose was to protect him. In fact, the temple of Isis did not lack a warrior. Maria also promised that she would not stop him from returning to his hometown. If Amon had something to do, she would send him to Duk to carry out a mission. There were still several months left before the original agreement of 1 year. Madanzo himself had also come to Montefiore, so Amon was not in a hurry. Whether it was magic or body arts, the higher the level of practice, the more profound and complicated it became. For the first time in his life, Amon suffered a failure. He wanted to process the snake tendon he obtained on the Babylon River into a magic artifact, but he did not control it well enough. He watched the precious snake tendon break in his hands and become useless waste. But he also had another unexpected gain, which was from Schrödinger. It was not surprising that Amon bought a private house in the city. With his status and salary, it would be strange if he did not buy another house in the city. Amon only left the temple when he was not on duty. Once he came to the back of the house and walked into the small shrine dedicated to the goddess Batet. He found Schrödinger drinking and eating meat on the altar. Amon smiled and stood there quietly, not disturbing the cat's good mood. Schrödinger did not look back, but he knew that Amon had come. After eating and drinking, he jumped off the altar, stretched out his paw and waved like a human, and then ran into the yard. When Amon chased after him, Schrödinger was already gone, but he left 2 lines of words on the ground, which were not written in hieroglyphs. It was the first time the cat had written secular words, and Amon was a little surprised. Others would not be able to understand what was written on the ground, but Amon recognized it at a glance. It was the serial number of the archives of the Temple of Isis. It seemed that the cat was in a good mood. After drinking, he pointed Amon to find 2 documents in the archives. What did Schrödinger want to show him? Amon was also very curious. Although he was the guard captain of the archives, he could not read the books in the collection at will. He could only try to arrange for himself to guard the corresponding reading room alone, and only when there was a chance that he could take out the files and read them carefully. The first document was found very quickly. It was placed at the bottom of a shelf protected by a detection magic circle in a high-standard document collection room. Fortunately, Amon's detection magic had been practiced to the highest level, and he could take out the document without sounding the alarm. The result surprised and delighted him. The name of the document was The Land of Marduk, and the content of the document was the legend about the town of Duk mentioned by Maria. Amon had spent more than half a year searching for it, and if it had not been for Schrödinger's guidance, he did not know when he would have found it. It seemed that the cat also knew what he was thinking. Amon never thought that the name of the town of Duk was related to the main god of the kingdom of Babylon, Marduk. It was the place where Marduk became famous, and it was the battle of the gods of the Anunnaki long ago. In the myths and legends of the Anunnaki, the first to become gods were the male god Apsu and the goddess Tiamat, and they gave birth to the male god Laham and the goddess Laham, and the female Laham gave birth to the god Anu. The Anunnaki divine clan was named after the god Anu, and it was said that he was the supreme god with the highest status. But what was going on? It involved a very long battle. The god Anu had 2 sons, Enlil and it was the legendary god of wisdom. He had a son named Marduk. Enlil gave birth to the god of the moon Nannar and the god of the sun Utu, and the god of the moon Nannar gave birth to Murin, known as the goddess of Venus. These gods did not necessarily represent the sun, the moon, and the stars, but they were just their names in the human world. Murin had once told Amon that the relationship between the gods was not the kind of blood relationship that mortals understood, but she did not explain much about it. But in the ancient books and legends that Amon had seen, it was still recorded according to blood relationship. It was said that when the gods divided the divine realm, there was a conflict, and it attacked and killed Apsu. In order to retaliate, Tiamat created 9 kinds of monsters, namely the 9-headed snake monster, the swamp snake, the scorpion-tailed dragon, the sea monster, the giant lion, the 3-headed dog, the scorpion, the mermaid, and the wild bull. He also gave his other son, Kingu, the sacred object that represented the supreme god when he founded the divine clan, the Book of Destiny, and asked him to take revenge. The gods were divided into 2 factions, one headed by Tiamat and commanded by Kingu, and the other headed by Enlil and commanded by Marduk. A battle of the gods broke out in the center of the continent, and no one knew how many gods fell at that time. The result was that Marduk won, killing Tiamat and Kingu and seizing the Book of Destiny, so the battlefield was also known as the Land of Marduk. However, there was friction on the side of the victors. As the leader of the gods, Enlil should have obtained the Book of Destiny, but Marduk gave it directly to the god Anu, so that Enlil did not become the supreme god who controlled the Anunnaki divine clan. Anu and Ea had no intention of continuing to participate in the struggle between the gods, and from then on retired to the legendary divine realm of Anunnaki. A conflict broke out between the 2 great gods, Enlil and Marduk, and the result was the division of the divine realm, with the rest of the gods attached to the 2 great gods' divine realms and enjoyed their own divine realms according to their contributions in the battle of the gods. Legend has it that the blood of the fallen gods condensed into the flame sprite, the muscles condensed into the Taraculus, the breath condensed into the enchantress of the wind, the sweat condensed into the aquatic ore, and the crystallization of the bones into ordinary parangons. And the gods' tear was condensed from the tears shed by the gods. The town of Duk was not the only place on the continent that produced parangons, but the production was very high, which naturally had something to do with the ancient war. When the 2 great gods divided the divine realms, the land of Marduk was drawn to the edge of Enlil's divine realm. Enlil did not want his own divine realm to have the name of Marduk, so the place where people lived was shortened to the town of Duk. There was no record of this legend in the local shrine, but it was recorded in the documents of the Temple of Isis far away in Igut. The land of Marduk was once very fertile, but because of the battle of the gods, it became desolate and devastated. That was the place where the gods had fallen, where they had been rejected by the gods, and where they had been exiled. The miners who lived there for generations to mine parangons for the people who worshipped the gods, and they were not allowed to leave their hometown. This was a kind of punishment, and it was said that their ancestors had supported Tiamat and Kingu in the battle of the gods. Legends were just legends, and no one could say for sure whether this was the truth or not. Amon grew up in the town of Duk, and he knew that the patron of the town was Murin. How Murin became the patron of Duk was not mentioned in the document, but it did mention 2 other things that caught Amon's attention. One was that the miners of Duk were cursed by the gods, and they had to do heavy labor for generations. The skills of the miners of Duk were also taught by the gods, including the awakening ceremony of power, and even the most basic magic skills. It was similar to the second awakening of power, but there was no real breakthrough. The purpose of the gods teaching the skills of the miners was to make them work for generations until they were redeemed and forgiven. No wonder Maria once said that Amon was a miner of Duk, and it was not difficult for him to pass the second awakening of power. She was the adoratress of the goddess Isis, and she did not care much about the legend of the Anunnaki divine clan. The truth of the legend was unknown, but the skills of the miners of Duk were true. The last step of mining parangons was done by mages, and only in Duk was it done by the miners. The second was a prophecy passed down from an unknown era. When the land of Marduk became fertile again, there would be a new god of the gods. Another was that there would be a new war of the gods. These legends could not be verified, but in the main shrines of Hittite and Assur, Enlil's oracle was clearly recorded. He would make the land fertile again, and he would become the true god of the gods. After reading the myths and legends recorded in the document, Amon gasped. These should be legends from a long time ago, and no one knew whether they were true or not. But Duk was indeed a very special place. He could not meddle in the affairs of the gods, but the land around Duk was about to become fertile again. If he wanted to guide his people back to their homeland, the road would be full of thorns and blood. Then he thought of another thing. Finding the way to become a god was the task given to him by Crazy Ol. Was it also related to the ancient legend and prophecy? Bear had been here before, and he had a connection with Crazy Ol. Crazy Ol should also know the records in the ancient book. Amon turned to the last page of the document, and his guess was confirmed. Someone had left 2 marks in the blank space. They were very vague, but the lines looked very much like the 2 sides of the token that Crazy Ol gave him. That token used to be Bear's token, so why did he leave the marks here? Was he waiting for someone else to read the document? Or was he hinting at something? Amon subconsciously wanted to take out the token and compare it, but then he remembered that he did not have it with him. It was not difficult to find the first volume, but it was not easy to find the second volume that Schrödinger had pointed out. According to the index number, the second volume was locked in a cabinet with many other important books. The key was in the hands of the senior priest in charge of the archives. The cabinet and the lock were enchanted with magic. Amon could not open it without leaving a trace, so he had to wait for an opportunity. Before Amon could wait for a suitable opportunity, he was summoned by the adoratress. It was still Gabriel who delivered the message in person. The place where the adoratress summoned him was the study where she dealt with official documents. It was very spacious, like a small palace. The adoratress gave him enough courtesy and allowed him to sit. The seat was far away from him, and there was a blanket in front of him. Amon could only salute on the blanket and then sit down to talk. Maria sat behind the desk. This was a private meeting. There was no one else in the study. Maria had asked Gabriel to leave. The distance didn't affect anything. Amon could still see her very clearly, even the curve of her eyelashes was incomparably clear. According to common sense, Maria should first praise Amon for his behavior at the blessing ceremony, but she did not say so. She just looked at him and asked, "Amon, how are you?" Chapter 99. Amon had once asked Maria this question, and Maria had asked him the same question today. The meaning behind it was very complicated. Perhaps only the 2 of them could understand it. It was just a simple greeting. Amon replied, "I'm doing very well. I've never been so free. But I'm also waiting." Maria's eyes were so soft and calm. She looked at him and asked, "What are you waiting for?" Amon looked back at her. His eyes were so natural. "I'm waiting for you to summon me. I'm also waiting to make a request to you. I once said that I would return to Duk and guide my clansmen back to their homeland." Maria nodded gently. "I remember. You said that you have something to do. How much time do you have left?" Amon, "More than 2 months." Maria, "A month later, I will send you to carry out a task. You will go deep into Duk surrounded by swamps and investigate the terrain there. You must report every change in detail. You are the most familiar with the area and the most suitable person to complete this task." "Amon, thank you. I will definitely complete this task." Maria said worriedly, "I have to remind you that after the flood, many monsters appeared in the mountains, plains, swamps, and deserts. This trip will be full of danger." Amon was slightly surprised. "I just passed through there last year. I didn't see any." Maria asked, "From where did you get to where?" Amon, "From the south of the inland lake, through the desert to Saya." Maria explained, "The monsters mainly appear in the northwest of the inland lake. With the reseeding of the flood, they have appeared in large numbers in the past 6 months. Now there are also many poisonous scorpions in the desert. Do you need to send enough mages to protect you? But you can't send a large group of people there. And this is a cross-border operation. I can't go with a public identity." Amon shook his head. "No need. I grew up there. It's more convenient for me to go by myself. As for the danger, I have experienced too much. I'm not afraid of it. Whether it's dangerous or not, whether it's a mission or not, I have to go. Now that I heard that a lot of monsters have appeared in that area, I have to go and investigate." Maria sighed softly. "Perhaps there is more than one path that people can choose. 1,000 miles of fertile land has appeared in the center of the continent where monsters run amok. It will be a place where countless heroes will build their achievements, but it will also be a place where various kingdoms will fight and kill each other. Must you guide your clansmen back to their homeland? Living in Igut and starting a family like many other ordinary people might be better." She was clearly persuading Amon, and presumably she had also read the document, Land of Marduk, and knew that the situation in that place would be very complicated. Amon replied sincerely, I made a promise to the dead and the gods that I will find the descendants of Duk and guide them back to their homeland. Unless they are unwilling, I will do my best to fulfill my promise. Maria seemed a little hesitant, but finally said, That day at the blessing ceremony, you saw the assassin. Not only did you throw the javelin to block the arrow, I saw it clearly from the platform. Then you rushed to the place where the assassin appeared. I was very worried at that time. Fortunately, the assassin ran away faster than you, otherwise your life would have been in danger. It was Gabriel who caught the arrow in the end. Later, she told me privately that she was no match for the assassin. Amon said frankly, Thank you for your concern, but that was what I should do. A soldier charging at the enemy on the battlefield is in danger at any time. Should I just turn around and run away? Maria's tone was a little emotional. I should thank you, and I should also help you in your matter, but I don't know how much I can help you. There is still a month before the mission. I will send you to patrol a place. When you get there, you will understand what I want to tell you. The adoratress not only wanted to send Amon to Duk to carry out the mission, but also to patrol a place before the mission. Her words were very meaningful. Amon did not ask further. He stood up and saluted, Thank you for your arrangement. Seeing that Maria also wanted to stand up, he finally sat down on the chair and waved his hand, No need to thank me. You will understand when you get there. I am sorry that I can't help you more. The conversation between the two was very short. The adoratress did not have much time to summon a guard captain alone. From beginning to end, Amon's attitude was respectful. The only difference was that the two of them kept looking at each other. When Amon left and turned around in front of the door, Maria suddenly said, Amon, take this. I think you should read more of these books. Amon turned around again and saw that Maria also stood up, holding a piece of paper in her hand. He quickly walked back and took the paper with both hands. Their fingertips accidentally touched each other. This was a violation of the rules. He was not allowed to touch the adoratress's body, nor was he allowed to directly deliver the adoratress's belongings. Even if he was a guard captain, the lightest punishment would be to cut off his finger. It was funny. This was the second time that Amon had faced this kind of punishment. But the adoratress did not blame him, nor did she summon the servants to punish Amon. She gently let go of the paper and let Amon take it. Then she said calmly, I forgot to ask the servant to hand this paper to you. Just pretend that I left it on the table and you took it yourself. This sentence was a reminder. She did not have to say it, but she still said it. Amon realized that he had overstepped the rules and hurriedly apologized. But there was always a soft feeling on his fingertips, which made him very ashamed. Maria shook her head and said, It was an unintentional mistake. It is not your fault. Why apologize? When you leave in a month, I will summon you again. Amon stood up and raised his head. There was only a table between them. He looked into Maria's eyes again. Suddenly, he felt an impulse in his heart. It reminded him of the unfinished kiss. God, at this moment, he really wanted to kiss her. This impulse made Amon lower his head and not look at her again. He bowed and left the study. The Temple of Isis did not only have buildings in Montefiore, but also large pastures, farms, and groups of slaves. The place that Maria sent Amon to patrol was south of Montefiore and close to Herrick. It was about 200 miles west of the Nile River. It was far from the river valley and the climate was dry. It was a semi-desert area with many tall stone mountains. There was sparse grass at the foot of the mountains. There were only some very drought-resistant shrubs in the crevices of the rocks. From a distance, the earth was yellow and the mountains were dark brown. At the foot of the mountains, there was a series of simple buildings made of stone. This place was very important to the Montefiore Temple. It was one of the main producers of parangons in the lower Igut. It was called Mount Horeb. Amon was the messenger who came to patrol Mount Horeb. He was also responsible for escorting the parangons produced this season back to Montefiore. He was very warmly received at Mount Horeb. The person in charge of this place was a 6th-level mage and senior priest named Poera. The environment here was very difficult. The living conditions were far from Montefiore. But there was one good thing about it: it was very profitable. Don't forget that Mount Horeb produced parangons. Although it was a desolate place, Lord Poera knew how to enjoy life. The courtyard he lived in was very luxurious. He even used the environment to set up a magic circle to make the courtyard cool and moist. The water he drank every day was specially purified from the Nile River. He could also eat fresh vegetables from the city of Herak, not to mention the cattle, sheep, and wine. It was a lucrative job to patrol here. Moreover, this time, Amon was appointed by the adoratress. Naturally, he was different from the previous messengers. Poera was a little uneasy. He knew that the adoratress had just come to power and was afraid that something wrong with him would be found out. So he gave Amon a generous gift as soon as he arrived. Poera's worries were unnecessary. Amon didn't want to deliberately cause trouble, nor did he want to blackmail him. He saw Poera's surprise and took the gift with a smile. After checking the accounts, he counted the parangons stored in the cellar and ordered the carts to be loaded with the things that should be transported back to the temple of Isis. Poera finally heaved a sigh of relief. Amon didn't care how well Poera treated him, nor did he deliberately find fault with him. A few days after arriving at Mount Horeb, he spent most of his time reading in his room. The paper Maria gave him contained the file numbers of several scrolls. Amon borrowed them from the archives and read them when he had time. Not all the documents in the archives of the Temple of Isis were written in hieroglyphs. As a warrior, Amon could also apply to borrow some scrolls recorded in the secular language. But during this time, Amon hadn't read a single one. He didn't even know how to flip through the secret texts written in hieroglyphs until Maria gave him this list of books. Amon didn't expect that Maria would let him read a book on the art of war. The content was about marching, how to integrate logistics, how to arrange battle formations, how to manage various troops, and how to command legions in battle. Amon was a warrior and had achieved the 6th level at a young age. It was very likely that he would become a supreme warrior in the future. Could it be that Maria was looking forward to him becoming a general? Of course, just reading books on the art of war wouldn't make him a good general, but it was still very useful. The proportion of people on the continent who could read was very small, and even fewer who could understand the art of war. But the book Maria let Amon study was very complete and systematic. It basically mentioned how to deal with any situation encountered in a battle. At least, it gave him the capital to start. If he became a supreme warrior and systematically studied the art of war, he would definitely be qualified to be the leader of the army in the future. Was this a hint from Maria? Amon studied very seriously. He also silently deduced the various battle scenes mentioned in the book. He memorized all the contents of the book from Montefiore to Mount Horeb. The accounts were checked and the parangons were sealed. But Amon didn't leave immediately because he still had to patrol. On the 3rd day after arriving at Mount Horeb, Amon asked Poera to go to the mine to see the process of mining parangons. Since Maria sent him here, there must be a reason. Of course, Amon had to patrol every place. Poera advised him at the table, "Lord Envoy, you don't have to go to that place yourself. If you really want to patrol, you can just watch the scene of the mages mining the ore. I will praise you in my report on how carefully you did it." Amon laughed in his heart. It seemed that the people here didn't know his origin. He was a real miner. The backyard of the house he grew up in was a workshop. He smiled and explained, "You don't have to call me Lord Envoy. Although I am the envoy, I am still a civilian. The adoratress ordered me to patrol the mine. Naturally, I have to be loyal and go to every place. Even if it is inconvenient for the noble lords to go, I should go." He wasn't a noble? Poera was well aware of this, but the captain of Mount Horeb's guards, Hardadef, who was sitting at the same table as Poera, showed a look of surprise and disdain. John was born in a great noble family in Montefiore. Now, like Amon, he was also a 6th-level warrior. He was cruel and had hurt people in a conflict. That was why he was transferred to Mount Horeb as a guard captain. It was a punishment. Hardadef was arrogant by nature, so he naturally resented staying in this remote place for a long time. Now, There was a special envoy who was said to be highly appreciated by the Saints. Coincidentally, he had made several meritorious deeds and was promoted to guard captain despite being a commoner. Hardadef felt depressed when he compared himself to Amon. At the same time, he looked down on Amon, which he inadvertently revealed at the table. Amon knew how John felt, but he pretended not to see it. He said pleasantly, "Lord Par, you don't have to worry about me. You don't have to accompany me to those filthy places. Just send some of your men to lead the way. I will patrol the place. It will be easier for the adoratress to complete her task." The mine of Mount Horeb was very large. It not only produced parangons, but also the stone used to build the shrines and the pyramids of the pharaoh. The first day Amon went to the mine, he felt like he had returned to his hometown. The mine here was much larger than the one outside Duk. There were guards to maintain order and craftsmen to direct the work. Most of the mining work was done by slaves. It was very hard work. The next day he inspected the mines that produced parangons. Accompanied by special engineers, he watched the whole process of mining. He even saw some of the parangons being mined with his own eyes. It was a very familiar feeling. He walked around the mines and found that the distribution of the mines here was much larger than that around Duk. The number of miners here was more than 10 times that of Duk, but the production of parangons was less than 1/10 of that of Duk. On the morning of the third day, Amon inspected the last step of the process of mining parangons. In a large and clean stone house, there were dozens of junior mages. They were using their staffs to open the mines and extract the parangons. These mages were sent by the temple of Isis. They would be rotated every season. It was a kind of training mission. They all had their own workshop and were always served by servants. Amon looked at the number of mages and the speed at which they were opening the mines. Comparing it with the total amount of parangons collected this season, he did a quick calculation and found something wrong. He asked the priest who was accompanying him, "According to my calculations this morning, the amount of parangons mined by these mages is only about 60% of the total produced this time. Is the production declining recently?" The priest hurriedly explained, "No, it's not like that. There is another group of people mining the mines. But they are of low status and the place they work is more crowded. Anyway, Mr. Amon has seen everything that needs to be seen. There is no need to go anymore." Amon paused for a moment. Sure enough, there was a situation here. The last step of mining was done by mages. How could there be a lowly person here? He immediately said, "I've even entered the mine, not to mention the workshop. Since I'm here, of course I have to inspect all the places. Take me there." The priest reluctantly said, "It's already noon. Let's have lunch before we go." Good wine was served at lunch. Several members of the patrol team kept urging Amon to drink. Amon drank a lot, but he was not drunk. After lunch, he urged his guards to inspect the rest of the places. The priest had no choice but to take Amon to a group of stone houses guarded by guards. It was like an independent village, surrounded by some low and shabby houses. In the middle of the stone houses, there was a large hall. The roof of the hall was not high and the door was very narrow. There were guards with weapons in front of it. Before Amon entered the door, he heard a loud shout from inside, "You dirty miner, do you want to die? How dare you destroy parangons? The envoy of the temple of Isis has arrived and ordered us to mine enough parangons for this season. But you can't finish the task. No one will have a good end. He is the example." Amon, who was walking inside, heard the roar and the sharp sound of the whip. He heard the words and dashed in like an arrow. The hall was very large, and there were many workbenches arranged around it. Dozens of miners in rough clothes were working with sledgehammers in their hands. On the anvils were the ores that had been mined, and only the final step was to extract the parangons. Behind a workbench near the door, there was a frail young man holding a heavy hammer. The ore core in front of him had already turned into powder. It was obvious that he had not controlled his strength perfectly when he dropped the hammer, and even the god's stone was destroyed. Amon recognized the young man at a glance. His facial features were so familiar, but now they were dark and thin. It was Moses, the son of Mayor Dusty. The captain of Mount Horeb's guards, John, had a furious look on his face, and he was waving a long whip at Moses. His vision blurred, and the whip landed solidly on a person's back. The person's clothes split open, and a bloody mark was left on the person's skin. The man turned around slowly with a sullen face. His chest was heaving violently, as if he was trying to suppress his rising anger. It was Ammon, the patrolling envoy sent by the temple of Isis. John was also shocked. He quickly put down the whip and said, "Mr. Ammon, why did you suddenly rush in? I couldn't stop my whip. I'm sorry to hurt you. It was an accident." Chapter 100. Ammon pushed away the person next to him and shook his head. "No, it's not an accident. I took the whip for this miner. Lord John, the emissary of the shrine you were talking about should be me, right? All the parangons for this season have been handed over. I didn't order the miners to mine more." "What do you mean by that? Did I ask you to whip these people? If that's the case, you should have whipped me instead." John was embarrassed by Ammon's rudeness. But he was the one who hurt the emissary, so he apologized. "Mr. Ammon, please don't blame me. I'm just angry at these dirty miners. This man just destroyed the precious ores that they have worked so hard to mine. As for your arrival, I just wanted to remind them to work harder." Ammon's face was still dark. He said in a reproachful tone, "Mining parangons is not guaranteed to be 100% successful. It's normal to damage one or occasionally. Why are you so angry?" John waved his hand and pointed to the miners around him. "Mr. Emissary, I'm afraid you don't know this. These people are the slaves of the pharaoh. They come from the town of Duk in the Hittite kingdom. Duk is a place detested by the gods. They are cursed and exiled by the gods. Their people, their ancestors, are dirty miners who have been enslaved by the gods for generations. It's their honor to be whipped by me personally." Ammon's expression had gradually calmed down, but when he heard this, he suddenly blushed again. His eyes were dark and sharp. He stared at John and said coldly, "In that case, it's also my honor to be whipped by you." John's hair stood on end under Ammon's stare. He replied in confusion, "Mr. Ammon, although you are not a noble, you are still an emissary of the shrine. How can you compare to these abandoned people of Duk?" Ammon said, "Lord John, you have lost your mind. I am a 6th-level warrior. Even my strong muscles and bones were hurt by your whip. How can this thin miner bear it? If you had whipped him, you might have killed him. They are not sinners. They are craftsmen who mine parangons for the shrine. Their skills should be respected. What right do you have to say what you just said?" Maria had sent Ammon to inspect Mount Horeb. The descendants of Duk were here. He didn't know what was going on, but John's words had aroused Ammon's uncontrollable anger. John was not only cursing the miners, but also Ammon's clansmen and ancestors, including his dead father. After all, he was only a child less than 18 years old. How could he bear it? However, Hardedef did not know Ammon's background. Ammon's actions seemed to be deliberately provoking and finding fault in front of everyone. At this moment he was also angered. He coldly snorted and said, "Mr. Ammon, you are the one who deliberately stood under my whip. I am also a 6th-level warrior. You can't take my whip, but you blame me for hurting you? How did you get hurt? You should ask yourself, why didn't you learn martial arts better?" What you said just now is very disrespectful to a noble of the empire. The air was filled with the smell of gunpowder. The attendants didn't know what to say. They all knew John's temper. He was impulsive, irritable, and easily angered. Once he was angry, he would be very violent to his subordinates and the slaves in the mine. These miners served the pharaoh and were also valuable resources. Pharaoh had ordered that they were not to be harmed at will. But for some reason, Captain John flew into a rage today and lashed out with such a whip. If the whip really landed on Moses, there would be serious consequences. Although he wouldn't have to pay with his life, he would definitely be punished and reprimanded. He had caused a similar disaster in Montefiore, which was why he was sent to Mount Horeb. But old habits were hard to change. Ammon didn't know about this. He was also filled with anger. Without a word, he turned around and snatched the hammer from Moses's hand. He slowly walked around the hall and came to each workbench and struck with the hammer. When he turned around, everyone was dumbfounded. This was because this special envoy had actually opened all the ore cores on the anvil. With every strike of the hammer, the hard shells of the ores turned into white sand and fell off. More than 30 parangons were undamaged in front of everyone. What a miraculous skill! Amon didn't use a staff like mages. Instead, he held a hammer in his hand. There was no need for further explanation. Everyone had already guessed the identity of this envoy, and even the miners were stupefied. In a short while, more than 30 parangons were mined, and none of them were damaged. It was quite a strenuous task for Amon. He walked back to John. His forehead was covered with sweat and the veins on his arm were throbbing. He said coldly, "Did you see that? I am also a miner from Duk. I want to ask you, what right do you have to say those words and insult the skill? You have insulted my people, my ancestors, my late father, and my respected teacher. Noble warrior, I will now formally challenge you to a duel. According to the laws of the Empire of Igut, this duel must be approved by you. As a commoner, I challenge a noble to a duel, and I will bear the consequences. Lord John, you just asked me why I don't have a better way to learn martial arts. Please grant my request and let us know what real martial arts are." The laws of the Empire of Igut stipulated that duels between warriors could be challenged to a duel under certain circumstances. Amon's situation was one of them. The duel must be witnessed by a notary, and the other party could refuse. Even if the noble agreed to a duel between a commoner and a noble, if the commoner hurt the noble, he would still be punished. Such a law might seem unfair, but the status of a noble and a commoner was not equal in the first place. This law at least provided a way for the commoner to take revenge first and bear the consequences later. Amon challenged Hardadef to a duel. His act of mining more than 30 parangons in a row had dissipated most of the anger in his heart. Now he looked at Hardadef with a sneer. John would never refuse. He was completely enraged by Amon. He pointed to the door and said, "Let's duel outside. You can choose the weapon you are good at." Amon shook his head. "I don't need any weapon. I only need this hammer." His contemptuous tone made John even more furious. The two walked out of the door side by side. Their attendants could not stop them. At this moment, Poera rushed in with his staff in hand. He grabbed one of them with each hand and tried to persuade them, "Warriors, why are you dueling for these lowly miners? Stop it quickly. It will be a disaster no matter who is injured." When Poera heard that Amon was injured, he immediately rushed to the door. He did not know the details of the duel. When he saw the two warriors about to duel, he hurried to stop them. Hardadef replied with a straight face, "As a noble warrior, I have already agreed to Mr. Amon's request for a duel. Unless he asks to withdraw from the duel, I will not go back on my word." Amon pushed Poera away and said, "My lord, I grew up in Duk. I am a lowly miner. He insulted my people and my ancestors, so I asked for a duel. But don't worry, I will only defeat him. I will not hurt him in the duel. You came just in time. You can be the notary of the duel." Poera stamped his foot. He wanted to slap himself. He came in such a hurry that he didn't know the situation clearly. Wasn't he just adding fuel to the fire? When he turned around, the two warriors were already standing opposite each other in the open space outside the door. John took out a heavy broadsword and Amon held his hammer. The duel was unstoppable. Poera had no choice but to stand in front of the door as a notary. He held his staff and was ready to cast magic at any time. If either of the duel was in danger, he would intervene immediately to avoid any irreparable consequences. At the same time, he was anxiously thinking about how to suppress this matter. He wanted to finish it quietly in Mount Horeb and not let the Temple of Isis know about it. Suddenly, Amon urged him, "Lord Poera, why haven't you started?" Poera finally realized that he had been in a daze. He raised his staff and signaled the start of the duel. Hardadef's figure shot out like an arrow from a bow towards Amon, who was more than 10 steps away. He raised the broadsword in his hand high, the blade glowing brightly. He didn't slash with the tip of the sword. Instead, he used the spine of the sword to hit Amon's shoulder that was holding the hammer. This man wasn't completely brainless. Although it was a duel, he just wanted to beat Aman to the ground and teach him a lesson. This sword strike was much more ferocious than the whip strike from before. Its speed and strength were both pushed to the limit. The onlooking warriors all gasped in surprise. John was still standing a dozen steps away, but in the blink of an eye, his sword had hit Aman's shoulder. The gasps turned into cries of surprise, but the cries were covered by a long, loud noise. Aman didn't move at all. He saw John's sword break into two and fly away. John also knelt on one knee in front of Aman with the hammer on his shoulder. With a flick of his wrist, he could have crushed John's head like a miner, but Aman didn't kill him. Only a few people saw what happened. John was fast, but Aman was faster. He was faster than John could react. When Hardadef rushed in front of Aman, the hammer in Aman's hand turned into a shadow and hit Hardadef's left knee before his sword could even land. John's legs went soft and he knelt on the ground. His sword had already fallen. Aman swung his hammer a second time in a short period of time and blocked the sword on his shoulder. There was a deafening noise and the light on the sword was shattered. John couldn't hold his sword. The heavy broadsword flew out of his hand and trembled in the air. Suddenly, it broke into two pieces. Aman turned his wrist and put the hammer on John's shoulder. Poera shouted, "The duel is over. Aman wins." John, who was kneeling on the ground, was sweating. No one knew better than him how terrifying Aman's attack was. When he rushed over, he saw Aman swing his hammer. Although he wanted to block it, he couldn't react in time. When the hammer hit his knee, he thought that his leg was going to be crippled. But it felt strange. There was no pain. Instead, a strange shock spread all over his body. His legs went soft and he knelt on the ground. Then, Aman swung his hammer upward and hit the broadsword. The sword shook so violently that John couldn't hold it. After the sword flew out, the force of the shock continued and broke the heavy broadsword in midair. Hardadef had a feeling that the hammer in his opponent's hand could kill or injure him in a split second. Even Poera wouldn't be able to stop it. A moment ago, Hardadef was still filled with anger, but now he felt a chill run down his spine. Aman said calmly, "This is the technique of Duk. It can open the core of the ore without damaging the parangons. It can also disperse your power and leave you unscathed. God bless me, I did a good job in controlling it. I didn't hurt you. Lord John, do you want to give up? Or do you want to fight again?" Poera walked over and said, "No need. I'm the judge. John has lost this duel." Hardadef, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly bowed his head and said, "Mr. Aman, I admit defeat." Even though he was also a 6th-level warrior, he didn't even have the strength to fight back in front of Aman. Although this warrior was irascible, his impulses came and went quickly. At this moment, he didn't have any temper at all. It seemed that Aman was still angry. He turned to Poera and said, "Since this warrior has given up, he should repent and apologize for his words and actions." Poera was about to persuade John to give up, but John nodded and said, "I apologize. I take back what I said just now. I apologize to all those who were insulted by me and make up for my behavior. Someone give me that whip. I'll return it to you." A subordinate brought the whip. John handed it to Aman with both hands. Poera's face darkened. He wanted to say something, but in the end he stepped aside. John took a few steps back and turned around. Aman didn't hesitate. He took the whip and lashed it at John. John was not wearing any armor. The whip split his clothes and left a bloody mark on his skin. The whip was neither light nor heavy, just like the one Aman suffered. Poera walked over and said, all right. Warriors, everything has been settled. No discord, no concord. We can all become friends." Aman threw the whip away and said, "Sirs, can we find a place to talk in private? I have something to ask in private." After the duel, they calmed down and could finally speak calmly. Aman and John's backs were covered with ointment. In fact, it was only a superficial wound. Poera also used healing magic on them. As the supervisor of Mount Horeb, Poera only wanted to be a peacemaker. He ordered his men to serve good wine and food, and talked to Aman with a smile. As for John, he was his subordinate, so his tone was naturally stricter. He scolded, John, you have to thank Mr. Amon. Those miners are the slaves of the Pharaoh. There are orders not to hurt them. How can you forget everything when you're angry? The young man named Moses is their leader. If you really kill him, you will be severely punished. Amon actually saved you today. Amon interrupted him, Lord Poera, I'm also a Duk miner. But I'm curious. How did the descendants of Duk come to Mount Horeb? Poera replied awkwardly, I don't know. They were sent here by the guards of the Cape States, and also by the order of the Pharaoh. Please forgive me. I don't know your origin. I'm just very curious. How did Mr. Amon also come from Duk? Amon replied indifferently, Haven't you heard? The god's tear inlaid on the adoratress' staff was mined by me. I was exiled as a punishment for offering the god's tear to the goddess Isis. But because of this, I escaped a catastrophic flood. John was surprised. You're the one who mined the god's tear? No wonder the adoratress gave me a special favor. The skills of Duk's miners are indeed not to be underestimated. It defeated me. Please forgive my recklessness. Amon could have ended the matter satisfactorily with a few more words. But he shook his head with a sullen face. Lord John, your recklessness and impulsiveness are a disaster. Not only did you violate the order of the Pharaoh and hurt the miners for no reason, but you also have another dangerous tendency, which means a more serious crime. Have you realized it? John was startled. He asked in confusion, What did I do, Mr. Amon? Amon asked coldly, Which god do you worship? John answered straightforwardly, Of course, the great patron of the empire of Igut, Horus, and the adoratress, Isis. He named a series of gods. When he finished, Amon asked unhurriedly, Today, you said that the miners were cursed and exiled by the gods. Which gods are you referring to? John was stunned. Poera, however, realized that something was wrong. He bit the bullet and replied, It was just a casual remark. Mr. Amon, please don't pursue it. Amon, however, did not let go of the topic. He turned to Poera and asked, Captain John, I don't know. But you are a mage, so you should know. I'm not pursuing it. I just want to make things clear. Please answer me. Poera broke out in a cold sweat. He had no choice but to answer, It's the gods of Anunnaki, the gods of Hittite, Babylon, and Assur. In fact, I don't know much about the legend of the miners in Duk. I've only heard people talking about it by chance. Amon turned to John with a straight face and said, You curse the people around you with the gods of a foreign country. Are you trying to betray your faith or commit treason? To tell you the truth, I sacrificed the god's tear to the goddess Isis. That's why I was exiled by the cities of Hittite. Is this also a crime for you? Amon's calm words were heavier than the powerful hammer just now. John, who had just calmed down, could no longer sit still. He hurriedly got up and knelt down. Mr. Amon, this is my mistake. I will never say the same thing again. Chapter 101. Some things could be big or small, and no one would pursue it if it was not revealed, but if Amon insisted on clinging to this loophole, it would not be a good thing if it involved the dignity of the gods. If the temple of Isis was brought to the adoratress and she needed to establish her authority, such an excuse would be the most severe punishment. Poera couldn't sit still anymore. He hurriedly stood up, grabbed Amon's sleeve and begged, Sir, I sincerely ask for your forgiveness. Please don't be calculative about the unintentional slip of the tongue of a warrior. If you have any request, please tell me. Amon finally smiled. He waved his hand and said, Sit down and talk. In fact, I don't have any other requests. All the lords here are loyal to their duty. I don't want to make trouble out of nothing. I just hope that my people can be treated better. Poera quietly wiped his sweat. He pulled John up and sat down with him. They toasted Amon together. He promised, Please rest assured that what happened today will never happen again. I will do my best to take care of the miners. They are indeed important to Mount Horeb. They deserve special treatment. Amon asked again, I was injured today. I need to rest here for a few days. The adoratress gave me a month's time. I'm not in a hurry to complete my mission. During this time, I hope to meet my people and ask them about their experiences. Is that convenient? John nodded. Of course it's convenient. As long as you don't take them away, nothing else matters here. That night, Aman was reading a book on the art of war in his bedroom upstairs. He looked out of the window thoughtfully. It was a full moon. The silhouette of the moon hung over the ridge in the distance. Even the shadows in the bright light were so clear. Under the moonlight, Mount Horeb had a faint smell of smoke and fire, just like the smell of Duk a long time ago. Aman seemed to be waiting for someone. When the moonlight shone through the window, the guard outside the door reported, "Mr. Aman, someone wants to see you." Aman smiled and said loudly through the door, "Is it Guard Captain John? Please come in, I've been waiting for you." The person who came was indeed John. He entered the room and bowed to express his apology for disturbing his rest so late at night. Aman smiled and said, "Since Lord Guard Captain has come to visit alone at night, you must have a personal request. If you have anything to say, just say it." John said, "First of all, I want to express my gratitude. You did not hurt me in the duel and have forgiven me for my unintentional mistake. Actually, I regretted it, but I was in a state of irritation that I couldn't control." Aman nodded. "I can tell. You were like two different people back then. If you were always so hot-tempered and impulsive, you wouldn't have been able to reach the 6th rank in physical skills. Did you come to find me for this matter?" John opened his mouth and said with some surprise, "Mr. Aman, you are so amazing. You saw through my intention at a glance." "Yes, that's the situation. There has always been an irrepressible restlessness in my soul. Sometimes I even lose my mind and just want to vent my power. I try to control it, but it is always difficult to avoid it. You still don't know what I've been through, do you?" John was born in a large noble family in Montefiore. His uncle was the current head of the agriculture department in Montefiore, a very prominent position. When he was 16 years old, he was brought to the temple and accepted the power awakening ceremony. What was awakened was the power in his bloodline. Thus, he became a warrior and had the best coach to teach him body arts and various martial arts. He regretted not becoming a mage. For a long time, he asked himself if the gods had abandoned him. Why didn't the gods give a noble soul like him a chance? His grandfather used to be a supreme mage, an honorary high priest of the temple of Isis. John had always been proud of him. In this case, he was determined to become the best warrior. But after awakening the power in his blood, with the progress of his body arts, his spirit became more and more irritable. He would always act on impulse because of small things. Although he regretted it afterwards, he couldn't suppress it and was in a state of losing control. 2 years ago, in a brothel in Montefiore, he lost his noble demeanor and injured a colleague and the owner of the brothel because of a dispute over who should drink with a girl. When he returned home, he was still angry and accidentally injured his wife, who tried to persuade him. His wife came from another noble family in Montefiore. She left him in anger and went back to her mother's home. He was also punished. His family used their connections to send him to Mount Horeb, hoping to temper his temper in this desolate place. John admitted that he was depressed in Mount Horeb. This desolate place made him feel even more desolate. His prayers to the gods could not be truly comforted. Yesterday, when he was drinking, he heard that Aman was not a noble but came to inspect Mount Horeb. He was not happy. This afternoon, when he saw someone accidentally damage a parangan while mining, he was immediately angry. He could not help but whip people. This had happened more than once in Mount Horeb. Not only the slaves and craftsmen, but also many of his guards had been whipped by him. It seemed that this kind of venting could soothe his mood, but it also meant that he was more restless. John said at last, "Today, when you hit me with your hammer, the strange impact seemed to disperse my power. I calmed down at that moment. You were also angered by me. If I were you, I would not have been able to control my powers so perfectly. I did not hurt anyone at all. Is this the technique of Duk? How do they control their power? To be able to smash such a hard ore into powder and leave a parangan intact, there must be something special about it. The attack you gave me today suppressed my restlessness, so I came to ask you for advice. Do you have any way to help me?" Aman listened and gradually frowned. He had experienced this feeling before. It was when he had just awakened the power of the two sides. At the same time, the desire and restlessness of the two sides were awakened. He remembered that in Duk, he always wanted to find someone to beat him up. But after he passed the test, the restlessness disappeared and did not continue. But John's situation was special. The restlessness was forcibly suppressed, but it did not disappear. As his power increased, it became stronger and stronger. He was a warrior of the 6th level. Naturally, he had to pass all kinds of tests. But no one had systematically summarized the tests of body arts, so he did not understand the situation he was facing. Fortunately, the person he asked today was Amon. Since he had asked, Amon would definitely try to help him. His clansmen were still on Mount Horeb. As long as Amon left, the fate of Moses and the others would depend on John and Poera. He looked out of the window and pondered, "John, is there a pattern to your restlessness?" John thought for a moment and answered, "Yes. The stronger I am, the stronger the restlessness. On the other hand, it is periodic. It seems to break out with the waxing and waning of the full moon. Today is the night of the full moon, so the restlessness is the most obvious. I have prayed to the goddess of moonlight, but it does not seem to work." Amon turned around and sat down. He looked at John and said, "Perhaps what has been awakened is not only the power of faith, but also the restlessness hidden in your soul. It is like two sides of the same coin. The restlessness will also awaken, but you do not know how to face it. It comes from the doubt and anxiety in your soul. You have desires that are never satisfied and you cannot let go, but you do not even realize it. There is a hidden devil in your heart, but you do not see it. All of this is just my judgment. I'm not sure if it is right or wrong, but I have a feeling that when you are impulsive, you will be very strong, but after that, you will become weak. You are weaker now than you were at noon. If you go on like this, it will hurt others and yourself. You do not know what will happen to you." As John listened, he couldn't help but stand up and kneel down. He nodded and said, "You're right. Even I can't describe it so clearly. Sometimes, I always feel that everything around me is against me, but I can't break through the shackles with my own strength. Only when I give up my rationality will I feel more relaxed. The effect of your hammer today was so obvious. You must have a way to solve it, please." Amon reached out and helped him up. He pressed him back to the chair and said, "I may not be able to help you. I cannot stay by your side and hammer you every time you are angry. But I can try a method. It also comes from the skills of the miners in Duk. If you want to learn it, you must keep it a secret. I do not need to explain the reason." John nodded and said, "Of course, I will listen to you. I cannot express my gratitude." Amon pointed to the sky outside the window and said, "Your agitation is affected by the environment, so I suggest you face it well. Looking up at the stars may give you peace of mind. You must have a firm belief, whether it comes from faith or not. You must see clearly what your heart is pursuing and find a clear state of mind. Only then will you know what you have to overcome." John was puzzled. "Look at the stars?" Amon smiled and shook his head. "It is to close your eyes and look at the stars in your heart. Release the feelings of your soul, and then slowly withdraw it. It is like a devout prayer to the gods. Let the power naturally accompany your heart, instead of being controlled by it. Only in this way can you truly be at peace. It may or may not work, but I suggest you give it a try." Amon taught John a method of prayer in detail. It was very close to meditation, but it was difficult to say it was a kind of magic. It took a long time for the warrior to fully understand what to do. Amon himself was not sure. If John succeeded, it would confirm his speculation. What would happen if the restlessness of desire led astray and the mind was controlled by the power? Just look at John. In the future, when teaching the power of two sides, Amon should be careful to avoid a situation like John's. But he did not tell John that this was actually a method of meditation to practice the power of two sides, and he would not tell him that he was a sorcerer. Even if someone knew what he taught John, it would be the profound content of the skills of the miners in Duk. It did not involve any specific magic, so no one could find anything wrong with it. John thanked him profusely and left when the sky was just beginning to brighten. Amon also breathed a sigh of relief. At least he knew that Moses and the others would not be mistreated too much in Mount Horeb. Although they still had to work for the pharaohs of Igut, it was good to know their whereabouts. As for how to get them out, Aman had no idea. It was better to ask Moses and the others about their experiences first. The next day, Aman had Moses brought to his room for a private interrogation. Moses used to be the young master of Mayor Dusty. He was fair and chubby, but now he had become dark and thin. It was sad to see him like this. Moses bowed to Aman as soon as he entered the room. "Thank you for saving me yesterday, my lord. Are you really a Duk miner?" Aman pulled him up. "Moses, don't you recognize me? The last time we met was 3 years ago. I am Aman. Have you forgotten?" Moses stared at Aman for a long time. Suddenly, he burst into tears and hugged Aman. "Yes, you are Aman, the drunkard's son. Aman, your appearance has changed completely. I can't recognize you. Yesterday, I heard your name from them, but I couldn't believe it. But your skill in opening ores is real. Duk is gone. Everyone is gone. How did you appear here and become an emissary of the temple of Isis?" Aman wiped away Moses' tears and asked, "Don't you know that I was banished from Duk before the flood?" "Really?" Moses was surprised. When Aman was sent to the mountains by Mayor Dusty to hunt down the evil sorcerer bear, Moses was not in Duk. He was sent to Saya by his father to study hieroglyphs and various classics. He did not know what happened in Duk. Later, a great flood engulfed his hometown, so no one told him about it. Aman sighed. "I mind a god's tear, but it was taken away by Lord Roddick's entourage on the spot. I will be severely punished by the kingdom. Your father found an excuse to drive me out of Duk. It was an exile, but also a kind of protection. My story is too long to tell. First, tell me how you came to Mount Horeb." Moses' eyes became wet again. After sitting down, he told the story of the sufferings of the survivors in Duk. Dusty raised Moses as his heir. In the whole town, he was the only one who had the right to send his son to Saya. Although Dusty was only a mayor, his status was not low. He was also rich enough to buy a manor in Saya for Moses to live in. He liked his son very much, but he was not too arrogant. He was also very strict with his son. Moses was 2 years older than Aman. He was 19 this year. When he turned 16, Dusty brought him to the shrine of Murin to receive the blessing and began to learn the mining skills of Duk. Although Moses did not need to mine the parangons himself, as the future manager of Duk, he had to master the skills passed down from generation to generation. As the chief priest of Duk, Dusty was also the host of the blessing ceremony. This ceremony would also be passed on to Moses in the future. Dusty's manor in Saya was not only the residence of Moses, but also the place where the Dushians stayed when they came to and from the city. There was a law in the kingdom that the registered miners of Duk were not allowed to leave without permission. But just before the flood, Dusty sent people to the city to deliver the taxes and buy the daily necessities needed in the town. The dozens of people sent were all young and strong miners. After finishing their official duties, these people stayed in Dusty's manor and casually brought some things for young Master Moses. Before they could set off for Duk, it began to rain heavily in the charcoal forest. The post road was cut off and they were stranded in the city. They became the other group of survivors apart from Aman. Moses' slaves were also from Duk. There were more than 60 of them in total. The supreme mage Goliath commanded the army and the people and finally saved Saya in the flood. After the flood, the town of Duk no longer existed. Of course, Moses and the others could not go back. Not long after, there was a rumor that the people of Duk had violated the oracle of the guardian god and were punished by the god, bringing about the flood. They were the people who were hated by the god and would bring disaster. Enlil the Great punished the town of Duk by washing the earth with a flood to bless the people. This rumor was terrible. The people of Saya, who had just experienced a disaster, were full of hostility towards the Dushians. There were even several incidents of siege and attack on the manor. The Dushians were strong and not to be trifled with. They took up weapons to defend the manor. In the end, a bloody conflict broke out. Some troublemakers were killed in the fight. The miners acted in self-defense. From the point of view of the law of the city, Lord Shawimo had no reason to punish them. However, The angry people could not forgive the miners for killing people. Almost every day, people gathered outside the manor and shouted, "Kill them, in the name of the god." There were always people who tried to rush into the manor and attack Moses and the others. The friction was endless. Even the guards of the city could not suppress it. Moses and the other Dushians had become the target of public criticism. Even the shops in the city were not willing to sell to them. When the food stored in the manor ran out, they could barely survive. At that time, Goliath was not in the city of Saya. The supreme mage had returned to the king's capital and closed his door to concentrate on his training. But Goliath seemed to have expected this situation before he left. He specially ordered his disciple, the acting high priest Walter, to take care of Moses and the others. When things got out of hand, Walter entered the manor with the guards of the shrine and found Moses. At that time, it was impossible for Moses and the others to stay in Saya. Walter asked him where he wanted to go. "You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.